59th session of the Senate in the first regular session of the 17th Congress is hereby called to order. Senator Panfilo Lacson will lead us in prayer.
Gracious, loving, and merciful God, on this day, as the light of your word penetrates our hearts, as we are reminded of the gift of life and faith, as the glories of your wisdom echo in this august chamber, we open ourselves up to your Spirit and give you thanks. Continue, we pray, to instill in us a profound sense of your abiding presence and help us to take to heart the wonder of your love, that we may walk in your ways and delight in your will. Help us, Lord God, to be faithful, gracious, loving, giving, and forgiving people you would have us be. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Senator Lacson. Session is suspended. Todi, pwede ko na ba? Yan na, tuloy ko. Session is resumed. Secretary, please call the roll.
Roll call of members. The Honorable Senator Sangara, Aquino, Binay, Cayetano, De Lima, Drilon, Ejercito, Escudero, Gatchalian, Gordon, Honasan, Ontiveros, Lacson, Ligarda, Pacquiao, Pangilinan, Po, Recto, Soto, Trillanes, Villanueva, Villar, Zubiri, Senate President Pimentel.
With 17 senators present, the chair declares the presence of a quorum.
Mr. President, I move that we dispense with the reading of the journal of the 58th session, Monday, February 6, and consider the same as approved.
Is there any objection to the motion? There being none, we dispense with the reading of the journal of the 58th session and consider the same as approved.
Mr. President, I'd like to acknowledge some guests in the gallery today. Firstly, we have the Political Science and Public Administration students of University of Luzon, headed by Professors Magdalena Valdez and Stephen John Santos, and graduate school students from the Leyte Normal University. Then we have guests of Senator Zubiri, Mr. President. The Department of Trade and Industry and a National Competitiveness Council, Mr. Guillermo Luz, National ICT Confederation of the Philippines, Mr. Michael Chu Lim, Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce Philippines Incorporated, Rex Darianani, Jivan Manjani, and also the Philippine Chamber of Commerce Incorporated with Ms. Grace Morella, and DTI Assistant Secretary Art Boncato, Susie Agustin, from the Department of Finance, Dennis Reyes and Nel Belgado. And we have also guests of Senator Pacquiao from Japan. The names are not with me today, Mr. President, but we'd like to, at the moment, not with me, would like to welcome them to the Senate, Mr. President.
Welcome to all of our guests.
Yes, the Japan group, Jerwin Ancajas, the super flyweight IBF superweight world champion, and Joven Jimenez, the manager trainer.
Welcome again to the Senate.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we proceed with the reference of business.
Is there any objection? There being none, the motion is approved.
Bills on first reading. 1314, an act exempting the Bureau of Internal Revenue from the coverage of Republic Act Number 6758, otherwise known as the Salary Standardization Law, as amended and for other purposes by Senator Sani Angara.
Referred to the Committees on Ways and Means, Civil Service, Government Organization and Professional Regulation, and Finance.
1315, an act exempting the Bureau of Internal Revenue from the coverage of Republic Act Number 6758, otherwise known as the Salary Standardization Law, as amended and for other purposes by Senator Zubiri.
To the Committees on Ways and Means, Civil Service, Government Organization and Professional Regulation, and Finance.
Communications, letter from the Department of Public Works and Highways, Regional Office Number 5, submitting to the Senate its Financial Accountability Report, Number 1, 1A, 1-B, Number 3, Number 4, Number 5, all for all funds for the quarter ending December 31, 2016.
To the Committee on Finance.
Letters from the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, transmitting to the Senate copies of the following certified and authenticated BSP issuances in compliance with Section 15A of Republic Act Number 7653, the New Central Bank Act, Memorandum Number M-2017-002, dated 18 January 2017, circular letter numbers CL-2017-006-007 and 008, dated 19 and 25 January 2017, and Circular Number 943 dated 26 January 2017.
To the Committee on Banks, Financial Institutions, and Currencies. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, with the permission of the Chamber, I move to transfer from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders. Senate Bill 1311 under Committee Report Number 33.
Is there any objection to the motion? There being none, the motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to consider Senate Bill 1311 under Committee Report 33.
Any objection? There being none, Senate Bill number 1311 is now under Committee Report number 33 is now under consideration.
May we ask the Secretary to read the title of the measure, Mr. President?
Secretary, please do so.
An act establishing a national policy on ease of doing business, creating for the purpose the Ease of Doing Business Commission, and for other purposes.
Mr. President, to sponsor the measure, may we ask the Chairman of the Committee on Trade, Commerce, and Entrepreneurship, Senator Juan Miguel Zubiri, be recognized to deliver a sponsorship speech. Thereafter, the Minority Leader will deliver a co-sponsorship speech tomorrow, Mr. President.
The Chairman of the Committee, Senator Zubiri, is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you to the Majority Floor Leader. Mr. President, as Chairman of the Committee on Trade, Commerce, and Entrepreneurship, it gives me great honor and privilege to present to you Senate Bill number 1311, otherwise known as the Ease of Doing Business Act of 2017, under Committee Report number 33. The proposed legislation in substitution of Senate Bill number 866, authored by the distinguished Minority Floor Leader, Senator Ralph Recto, and taking in consideration Senate Resolutions number 23 and 54, filed by Senators Bam Aquino and Grace Poe, respectively, seek to introduce reforms to streamline the requirements and simplify the procedures in the issuance of licenses, clearances, and permits to business entities, both at the national and local levels. This bill is the final outcome of a series of public hearings, technical working group meetings, and consultations that we had conducted with stakeholders from national agencies, local government units, and the business sector, together with the different chambers. And I'm happy to note that we have friends from the Indian Chamber of Commerce, as well as the Go Negosyo Group, here with us today, together with Mr. Bill Luz of the National Competitive Commission. This landmark legislation, Mr. President, is our answer to the clamor of the business sector and government agencies to ease of doing business in the country, to make our country competitive and compliant with sound global practices and standards. Before I proceed with the salient features of this bill, Mr. President, I would like to present first to the body our standing before the international community on our competitiveness and ease of doing business in the country. I'm referring to the Ease of Doing Business Report of 2017 in the Global Competitiveness of 2015 to 2016. These two studies measure the competitiveness and conduciveness of a country's business environment. The Doing Business Report is a study of the staff of the World Bank, Mr. President, with external contributions, and it measures the regulatory quality and efficiency of a country or economy. For 2017, the report says it considered 190 countries or economies, and the Global Competitiveness Report is a compilation or collection of data done by the World Economic Forum. Based on 2016 and 2017 rankings in the Doing Business Report of the World Bank, the Philippines has climbed in ranking by 4 notches, or from 103 in 2016 to 99 in 2017. However, despite this gain, notable in the report is a rank in starting a business where the Philippines fell by 6 notches from 2016. In the Doing Business Report in 2017, in the ASEAN region, the Philippines ranked 6th out of 10 countries, while Singapore tops our region and ranks 2nd worldwide. On the first slide, we'll show you the Philippine Global Competitiveness Index. The Philippines also improved its rankings by 5 notches, from rank 52 in 2015 to rank 47 in 2016. The country is steadily improving its ranking in the last 4 years. On the second slide, It selected Philippine competitiveness indices of infrastructure, for example, in 2015. Despite the country's improved ranking, the Philippines still has a lot of catching up to do, especially on the infrastructure pillar. And on the next slide, we'll show you the most problematic factors of doing business in the Philippines. The most problematic factors in doing business, Mr. President, in the country includes corruption, inadequate supply of infrastructure, tax regulations, and inefficient government bureaucracy. That's the top 4 complaints of our business folk. The top 5 would be tax rates. And this is a list coming from the Global Competitiveness Report, Mr. President. On the 4th slide, it's the infrastructure pillar rankings of ASEAN out of 140 countries. The Philippines ranks 90th among 140 countries and ranks 6th in the ASEAN in the infrastructure pillar. Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, and Vietnam are ahead of us in the rankings. Inadequate infrastructure is often cited as the problem, one of the main problems of improving investment climate. You can see that we're ranked 90th. On the 5th slide, on the infrastructure spending, I'm happy to note that Congress this year, through our very hardworking chairman on the Committee on Finance, together with the House contingent, earmarked more than 800 billion pesos in the GAA for infrastructure spending this year. That is about 5% of the country's projected GDP for this year. This infrastructure spending is expected to continue and increase within the next 6 years, even reaching 7% of GDP on the last year of the Duterte administration. And we know, according to the World Bank, a middle-income family in Asia has to spend over 5% of GDP on infrastructure to meet their needs for the next 10 years. On the 6th slide, institution pillar rankings of the ASEAN out of 140 countries, we can see the Philippines ranked 77th. Assesses the institutional, this ranking, ladies and gentlemen, assesses the institutional environment which covers concepts related to protection of property rights, efficiency, transparency of public administration, independence of judiciary, physical security, business ethics, and corporate governance. And we are ranked number 77. On the 7th slide, Mr. President, this is quite interesting. The Philippines has 16 procedures in starting a business, compared to our ASEAN neighbors like Singapore with 3 procedures, Malaysia only 3 procedures. Even Laos, Lao People Democratic Party is more efficient than us with 6 procedures together with Thailand. Tayo po, let me repeat, we have 16 procedures before we can start a business in this country. On the next slide, registering a property is even more difficult in our country. In registering a property, the Philippines has 9 procedures, while Thailand has 3, Singapore and Laos Republic have 4 each, and Indonesia and Vietnam have 5 each. As a matter of fact, Mr. President, in my experience as a businessman, when I left the Senate in 2011, registering a property you may end up going through several government agencies. You have the Bureau of Lands, Register of Deeds, the DENR for the approved lot plan. You have the Department of Agrarian Reform if your area is in an agricultural area. And then you even have to have an NCIP clearance, the National Commission for Indigenous People. So if you're actually doing business in the province where we come from, in Mindanao, in the countryside, it may take up to a year to be able to get clearances for your properties and to start a business or a small plant. On the next slide, Mr. President, paying taxes. It's so embarrassing that the country has 36 tax payments, and I'm glad Senator Sani is listening, being the chair of the Ways and Means Committee. We need to do 36 tax payments for a business in this country within a year. While Singapore has 5 payments, Malaysia has 13 payments, Brunei has 27 payments, And imagine, Myanmar has 31 payments. Again, natalo pa tayo nitong mas maliit natin mga kapitbahay sa ASEAN. And in the next slide, enforcing contracts. This is time to resolve a dispute. Alam na lang po ni Senate President yan, being a top-notch lawyer. Enforcing contracts in our country, the Philippines has an average of 842 days, or 2.3 years, while Singapore has 150 days, Vietnam has 400 days, Malaysia has 425 days, and Thailand has 440 days. Again, this source is the Global Competitiveness Report and not yours truly. So this has been a very efficient study done throughout the region. On the next slide, on the 11th slide, when we discuss resolving insolvency, it takes the country 2.7 years, Mr. President, close to 985 days to solve insolvency as in an average, no, for our companies. Singapore is 0.8 years, and Malaysia takes 1 year, Indonesia 1.9 years. I have shown and you know, ladies and gentlemen, I also want to present recently the foreign direct investment. Foreign direct investment, because of such problems, Mr. President, because of such problems, no, before we show the slide on foreign direct investment, Mr. President, I want to show you the Corruption Perception Index, the CPI. In 2014, we were ranked 85. 2015, we went down 95 in rank. In 2016, we dropped even further with a ranking of 101, Mr. President. And a lot of this turns off a lot of the businessmen. And if you notice, my next slide will be the foreign direct investment in the ASEAN region. Again, kulelat po tayo. We are ranked 6th. So when you say our economy is growing, if you ask me, Mr. President, it has a lot to do with internal spending by our brothers and sisters coming from, of course, our foreign OFWs that are sending money to us, and local businessmen who are resilient in spite of all these problems they face. But just look at the foreign direct investment, Mr. President. We are number 6th in ranking. We are so far away from our neighbors when it comes to foreign direct investment. And this is only on 2015 alone. So, Mr. President, I have shown the various factors affecting ease of doing business in the country. The factors that determine our competitiveness and ease of doing business ranking as compared to the rest of the world. Even in comparison with our ASEAN neighbors, the country's ranking does not portray a rosy picture of our business environment. It also shows that much has to be done to increase our competitiveness and ease of doing business in the Philippines. I'll show you a slide on the DTI Toolkit, published by the DTI Bureau of Micro, Small, and Medium Enterprises in 2008, which we find to be relevant to this day. Processing time for business, registration requirements for a business entity or different agencies can take as short as 30 minutes to as long as 3 months. Business name registration with the DTI, the SEC, and Cooperative Development Authority can be processed within an hour or within a day. The business permit issued by local government units can likewise be issued in a day or two. As a matter of fact, I always use Valenzuela, the city of Valenzuela, as an example, where it takes them just several hours to finish all their business requirements. And I congratulate Senator Sherwin for that. And I believe even when Mayor J.V. Ejercito was mayor of San Juan, he also is one of those we call best practices for efficiency in releasing these permits. However, the issuances of licenses and clearances and accreditation by regulatory agencies can take months and months to be released. We are cognizant of the fact that this is part of the agency's regulatory functions to ensure that business entities meet certain environmental, public safety, and public health standards and compliance with certain regulatory laws. It is, however, Mr. President, equally important to establish and improve regulatory discipline and regulatory quality. Against this backdrop, your committees on trade, commerce and entrepreneurship, and civil service, government reorganization, and professional regulation, are presenting this bill, which intends to cure the defects in the current system of business communities transactions with government, and prescribes a definitive period within government's action on applications for business license, clearances, and permits are to be completed. However, this bill does not present itself to remedy all the problems I've earlier cited, but it intends to create an environment for ease of doing business in both national and local governments by streamlining the processes and simplifying the requirements of business transactions within government, and prescribing a definitive period within which applications will be acted upon. Gone will be the days, Mr. President, that this businessman here will be waiting months and even years to get their permits and licenses. Although efforts have been instituted by government to simplify and streamline processes in permitting and licensing, among the most recent is the Joint Memorandum Circular Number 1, Series of 2016, between the Department of Trade and Industry, Department of Information and Communications Technology, and the Department of Interior and Local Government. Yet much has to be accomplished. As business registration in the Philippines involves both national government agencies and local government units, it is imperative to introduce reforms and re-engineer the process at the local government level and undertake parallel measures to minimize, if not eliminate, the undue regulatory burden from licensing and permitting requirements and processes required of business entities by national government agencies, including regulatory agencies. Thus, this bill shall apply to all government agencies or instrumentalities and local government units involved in the issuances of licenses, clearances, and permits to business entities. Let me emphasize, Mr. President, that this bill also, as indicative of the title, Ease of Doing Business, covers only the transactions of business entities and the national and local governments in the issuances of licenses, clearances, and permits. It does not cover transactions of individuals or entities for personal concerns or not business-related, which are within the purview of the bill, or the law rather, of Senator Ping Lacson, which is Republic Act 9485, or the Anti-Red Tape Act of 2007. At this point, allow me to highlight the salient points contained in this measure. Aside from, also, Mr. President, I show you the Uniform Comprehensive Checklist. Aside from the checklist of requirements, it's the step-by-step procedures and schedule of fees for the issuance of license, clearances, or permits that shall be conspicuously posted at the premises of and respective websites of national and local government licensing permitting agencies and linked to the Central Business Portal. Very important po ito, Mr. President, kasi it has been my experience as a businessman, as well as the experience of several businessmen, that nagbubunga yung checklist nila, and that is a cause of concern and sometimes cause for corruption. What happens is they give you a checklist of 10 items, and then if they want to give you a hard time, they add to the list another 5 items, and then last 2 items, and then they will, that is the problem, Mr. President, wherein there could be an opening for corruption. And that is why all now, under this law, all government agencies dealing with business must now provide a checklist, a published checklist in their websites as well as entities of business for these agencies. If additional documents will be required, the applicant shall be officially notified of the reasons for the submission of additional documents, if required, Mr. President. On the next slide, I believe this is also very important. It's the prescribed processing time for business entities classified as micro, small, and medium enterprises as defined in Section 3 of Republic Act 9501. The prescribed processing time shall not be longer than 3 working days for simple applications, and 10 working days for complex applications from the time the application has been received. As I mentioned earlier, Valenzuela City, it takes all of less than a day for all these clearances and permits to be given out. Even just a few hours, Mr. President. For special, that's correct, Madam. San Juan, also one day.
Makati.
I will ask Mr. Bilus, who's behind us. He has the complete list. Maybe I could answer that during the period of interpellation. I will have all the list ready there for you, Madam Finance Chair, Mr. President. But for special type of businesses that require clearances and accreditation or licenses issued by government agencies, including regulatory agencies as provided for by law, where technical evaluation or such necessary conditions is required in the processing of licenses, clearances, and permits, the prescribed processing time, Mr. President, shall be no longer than 30 days. We're a bit more, I'd say, more forgiving. And the reason why we do this, Mr. President, is because we have to make sure there are certain industries, like the petrochemical industries, construction industries, where the designs, engineering designs, have to be verified. Sometimes the environmental concerns have to be addressed. So we give them 30 working days. The national government agencies and LGUs shall process the application of business entities and communicate the decisions regarding the approval or disapproval, along with the comments, within the prescribed processing time. To track the status of the application, national government agencies and LGUs shall assign a unique identification number to an applicant. A reference number for each transaction also has to be provided to the applicant to track the status of the application, whether submitted manually or electronically. This has been a problem that I have time and time seen, Mr. President, as chairman of your committee on cooperatives. Many cooperatives, once they submit all the documentary requirements to the BIR for application for a simple certificate of tax exemption, ang palaging sagot sa kanila, more often than not, their complaint to me is, nawawala yung application. Hindi na nila alam kung saan napunta yung application, to who so-and-so at the office. And then, again, it is open to some sort of negotiations and corruption. So this time, we want to automatically, electronically rather, track all these requirements submitted by the applicants. On the next slide, Mr. President, is another measure that is being done in several countries. As a matter of fact, I had a meeting today with the ambassador of Spain, and the Spanish ambassador had said that after a certain amount of days in Spain, if your request has not been applied for, it is automatically deemed approved. So, Mr. President, an application for a license, clearance, or permit shall be deemed approved upon failure or inaction of the concerned national government agency or LGU to process and issue the license, clearance, or permit after the prescribed processing time has lapsed, without informing the applicant of the error, omissions, or the additional requirements and documents to be submitted. The automatic approval shall only apply if all the requirements have been submitted and all the necessary fees have been charged and paid. However, if the application requires the approval of the local Sanggunian and the local Sanggunian has denied the application, the provisions of the prescribed processing time and automatic approval shall not apply. This is to respect the local autonomy of the LGU as embodied in the local government code. For example, Mr. President, and I'm sure during the deliberations this will be taken up, if a coal-fired plant, particularly a coal-fired plant would want, a company would want to build in a particular locality, and the Sangguniang Bayan denies the approval of their application, then we have to respect the Sangguniang Bayan for their, especially under the local government code. On the next slide, Mr. President, the extension in the processing of application. For valid reasons, the agency would need longer time to review the qualification and merit of the application of a business entity. The agency may extend the processing for a reasonable period. Extension shall only be made once, and the concerned, once only, one extension, Mr. President, and the concerned national government agency or LGU shall inform the applicant prior to the lapse of the prescribed processing time for such extension. The next slide shows the validity of a business permit. Business permits shall be valid for a period of 1 year, and the city and municipality may have the option to renew business permits within the first month of the year or the anniversary date of the issuance of business permits. The reason why we included this in the law, Mr. President, during the deliberations, Quezon City Mayor Herbert Bautista had said that in Quezon City, it becomes so chaotic that during the month of January, because under the local government code, it is the month of January when everybody pays the business permits, RPT, and et cetera, et cetera. So, ang nangyayari po, punong-puno ang City Hall, sa dami ng tao, hindi po nila na-actionan kaagad at nagkakaroon po ng irritation and alitan at away between the local government unit personnel and those applicants. So, we now may allow the local government unit to do it on the birth date of the business. For example, if I file today, February 7 of this year, the renewal of business application could be February 7 of 2018, rather than magpipilahan po kami ng January of the beginning of the year. That is an option we gave the LGUs if they want to pursue that, or just leave it again as part of the first month of the year. On the next slide, Mr. President, the Department of Information and Communications Technology is mandated to provide qualified LGUs for free the software for the computerization of the BPLS. This is the Business Permitting and Licensing System. Within a period of 1 year from the effectivity of the law, cities, municipalities shall, as far as practicable, automate the Business Permitting and Licensing System, or BPLS, or set up an electronic business one-stop shop. The DICT, the DIG, and the DTI shall provide technical assistance in planning and implementation of a computerized or software-enabled BPLS. This proposed measure will also institutionalize a one-stop business facilitation service, or the Business One-Stop Shop, the BOSS, B-O-S-S, for the city or municipality's business permitting and licensing system. The cities and municipalities can then later on transition the BOSS into an electronic BOSS upon adoption of an online mechanism for submission and processing of issuances of licenses, clearances, and permit applications. Cities and municipalities with e-BOSS shall develop electronic versions of licenses, clearances, or permits with the same level of authority, which will be printed by businesses in the convenience of their offices. Cities, municipalities, which use manual signatures, shall designate alternative signatures in the absence of an authorized approving authority. We also included a special section for our friends of the Bureau of Fire. Mr. President, mahal na mahal ko sila, pero sa lahat ng aking meetings with business communities, Chamber of Commerce, Management Association of the Philippines, small and medium enterprises, micro enterprises, their number one complaint have been our friends with the Bureau of Fire. As a matter of fact, even the brother of Senator Gatchalian has also had problems with the Bureau of Fire in their particular locality. So we have adopted a special section of the law where we have adopted and institutionalized the salient features of the Joint Memorandum Circular Number 1, Series of 2016, on the issuance of Fire Safety Inspection Certificate. The FSIC shall be issued within 30 working days. For a new business permit application, the FSIC already issued during the occupancy permit stage shall be sufficient as basis for the issuance of the FSIC for a business entity as a requirement for a business permit. The BFP or any of its officials or employees, let me repeat, any of its officials or employees shall not sell, offer to sell, or recommend specific brands of fire extinguishers and other safety equipment, which has been a complaint of all our business investors. The BFP shall co-locate with a BOSS or BOSS or in an appropriate area designated by the city or municipality within its premises to assess and collect the fire inspection fees, Mr. President. Kasi ngayon, it's been a common fact that before they act on your application, meron po silang recommended fire extinguishers, fire alarm, sprinkler systems. Pag nabili nyo na yan, i-inspect na nila ang inyong negosyo. Sana hindi na po mangyari ito. That's a common complaint. Unfortunately, Mr. President, this is a common complaint duly recorded in all our public hearings. Next slide will show the central business portal. The DICT shall establish through government infrastructure a cloud-native central business portal or other similar technology as the DICT may prescribe, which shall serve as a central system to receive application and capture application data from business entities. The national government agencies and LGUs can connect with the central business portal and use its facilities. On the next slide, we'll also come up with the Philippine Business Registry Data Bank. Business licensing and permitting agencies, such as, but not limited to, the DTI, SEC, the CDA, or Cooperative Development Authority, the BIR, and local government units shall access the Philippine Business Registry Data Bank to verify the validity, existence, and other information relevant to a business entity. The submission of documents already provided by an applicant to an agency with access to the Philippine Business Registry Data Bank shall no longer be required by other agencies having similar access. All proposed regulation of national government agencies and local government units shall undergo regulatory impact assessment to establish if the proposed regulation does not add undue regulatory burden and cost to business entities and national government agencies. This is tasked to conduct, or the agencies, or rather, this is to conduct the RIA and continue the review and repeal of existing executive issuances and recommend the repeal of existing laws and local ordinances which are outdated, redundant, and adds undue regulatory burden to business entities. As a matter of fact, the National Competitive Council, headed by Mr. Luz, has already, together with several agencies of government, repealed outdated memorandum orders, administrative orders, and other local ordinances that have been passed decades ago are not anymore relevant today. Even I believe, Mr. President, the Australian Parliament has one day of the year to, I forget the name, 2 days of the year, to review outdated laws, and they actually either they repeal it or they amend it. We also are going to come up with a national policy on ease of doing business, which is a comprehensive business registration and regulatory management policy, which is to be established. It will be the guide of all national government agencies and LGUs in their formulation of business registration and regulatory policies and procedures. The Ease of Doing Business Commission is created, which will be created, shall be a policy-making body on business transactions, registrations, and regulatory management, which shall set the overall direction of the implementation of the national policy on ease of doing business. The Ease of Doing Business Commission, Mr. President, is the go-to commission or go-to government agency now for business people who have problems of red tape with these local government and national government agencies. The EODB Commission, which we will create with this law, is not just all bark, but it bites as well, especially when national government agencies or LGUs refuse to issue licenses, clearances, or permits when the prescribed period of processing of the application has lapsed. Once a complaint has been lodged to it, and upon its evaluation that the complaint has sufficient basis, it can compel the concerned national government agency or LGU to issue the license and clearance clearances or permits under the pain of filing a formal complaint with the Civil Service Commission or the Ombudsman. Alam naman po natin, Mr. President, lahat ng mga negosyante takot yan mag-file ng complaint. Let's face it, especially if you're from a particular locality and you're dealing with a local government unit. So at least I complain to the Commission can act on behalf of these business entities, whether they're micro, small, medium, or large enterprises. The Commission shall assist complaints in filing necessary cases without prejudice to the jurisdiction of the Civil Service and Ombudsman as the case may be. They can facilitate the issuances of licenses, clearances, or permits deemed approved by virtue of Section 7 of this Act, or the provisions on the automatic approval of applications. They will compel or petition any government agency, instrumentality, or local government to issue the permit, license, or clearance of business entities deemed approved by virtue of Section 7 of this Act. And they will conduct a periodical review and assess the country's competitiveness, performance, and challenges and issues. They will also recommend policies, processes, and systems to improve regulatory management to increase the productivity, efficiency, and effectiveness of permitting and licensing agencies, and to conduct a regulatory management training program to capacitate national government agencies and local government units to comply with sound regulatory management practices. The next, Mr. President, the Commission shall be composed of a chairperson, a secretary of the DTI, and the secretary of the DOF as ex officio members, and one private sector representative, each for the MSME sector and for the large industry sector. The Commission shall establish a secretariat headed by an executive director, and its organizational structure shall include regional offices as may be required to effectively carry out these powers and functions. We also included more teeth to the Act by certain penalties. But prior to going to the penalties, we shall just discuss briefly, Mr. President, violations of this Act. Refusal to accept application within the prescribed period, or any document being submitted by the applicant, provided that all required documents have been submitted and necessary fees have been paid. Failure to refer back to the applicant an application which cannot be acted upon due to lack or incomplete requirements, or non-payment of the required fees or charges within the prescribed period. Failure to act on an application despite the complete submission of requirements and payment of required fees and charges within the prescribed period. Failure to give the applicant a written notice on the disapproval of an application within the prescribed period, or inform the applicant of any error, omission, or deficiency in the application. Imposition of additional irrelevant requirements other than those provided by the concerned agency or local government units posted on their websites or areas of transaction. And the penalties of this, Mr. President, to give this law more teeth, we propose to impose stiffer penalties. Criminal liability will also be attached once the violation was done deliberately and maliciously with the purpose of harassing the applicant and or to solicit in cash or in kind. In such case, the provision of the revised penal code shall apply and such other applicable penal laws. Mr. President, as I mentioned earlier, the last ranking of the 2016 Corruption Perception Index reported by the Transparency International, and I'll ask my staff to present that slide, we slid down by 6 notches from 2015 to 2016, Mr. President. The beauty of this law, it is not just making it easier to do business in the country. It is also an anti-corruption measure, Mr. President. Many of us here have heard or might have personally experienced that a business license or permit applications that have been languishing for so long in local and national government offices. Sometimes you're clueless on what could be the reasons for the delay. My personal experience, Mr. President, when I got into medium enterprise, when I bought a property in Cagayan de Oro, Mr. President, from an 800 square meter property, I chopped it down to 400 square meters as the owner only wanted to sell half the property. It took me 6 months. This was only a few years ago. 6 months to get the approved lot plan from the DENR. It was languishing there, and my poor geodetic engineer kept coming back. Nobody was minding him until I had to use my friendships, because I was a former senator. When I resigned, I had some friends in the region. I had to use my friendships to ask in a favor to move my document so that I can utilize that, because without that the absence of that document, Mr. President, I cannot transfer the title into the company name. And if we cannot transfer the company to the title to the company name, we cannot approach the bank for loans. So, nakabinbin po yung bank loan, yung business permit, yung construction permit, everything was held for 6 months. So, I've had that personal experience as a small and medium business enterprise, starting a small and medium business enterprise, Mr. President. So, my experience I'm bringing in with this piece of legislation, Mr. President. This practice is a disgrace to the Filipino race. This practice in many government offices, both in national and local, is a disease that we must cure, Mr. President. This law is an attempt in that direction, as it will make it more transparent in processing of business licenses, clearances, and permits, which are traditionally a haven for corruption. This law imposes stringent measures to prevent the commission of corruption in such transactions. In closing, Mr. President, it's a well-settled principle that the lifeblood of any government are taxes. And taxes come from many sources, but mainly from the income and other taxes imposed on business entities, whether corporations, partnerships, or single proprietorships, or MSMEs. And from the income as well, Mr. President, taxes from the workforce that they employ. In other words, Mr. President, the more business entities operating in the country, the more taxes can be collected by both local and national government agencies. And perhaps when that happens, we will no longer need to pass the tax reform bill or its provisions which remove certain tax benefits to some marginalized sectors. And we are losing the fight when it comes to foreign direct investments in the region. And what we need badly are jobs. Jobs and more jobs, Mr. President. But if we scare both foreign and local investors because of corruption and red tape, then we have lost the fight against poverty. Many have said that one way to reduce poverty and attain inclusive growth in the country is to make an entrepreneurial nation out of our citizens. This bill will tremendously help attain that goal. It will encourage our citizens to venture into businesses and provide employment for our people. Also, it will encourage those in the informal economy to register and join the formal economy. Mr. President, it is before us now, through this bill, to create an environment that will be conducive to businesses to register, comply, and operate. It will be easier to create and register businesses, comply with regulatory and other governmental requirements, and operate in an environment that will hasten their growth. It will also encourage foreign investments to the country. It will create more economic activities, and that means, Mr. President, more income for government, and most especially, more employment opportunities for our people. And let me reiterate, more income for government. Thus, I urge our colleagues to immediately pass this bill. Mabuhay po ang Senado, mabuhay po tayong lahat. Maraming salamat.
Majority Leader. Senator Gatchalian is raising his hand. What's the
Yes,
question?
Mr. President, the Minority Leader will be delivering his co-sponsorship speech tomorrow. But at this point, Senator Gatchalian wishes to make a manifestation.
Mr. President, just a
Is there
quick
any objection?
manifestation.
Senator Gatchalian is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a quick manifestation. Let me laud the chairman of the Trade Committee for this very important reform in the ease of doing business. And this is not only in registering business, but also reforming how registering business at the local level, at the LGU level. And let me also thank him for citing Valenzuela City. Wala po akong pinakain ho dyan, wala akong binigay na bonus, but Valenzuela City has really made a lot of strides and hard work to improve its system and make the lives of our businessmen easy in the locality of Valenzuela. But let me just highlight, three very important reforms that the good chairman indicated in his bill. Number one, Mr. President, is the standardization of application in all local governments. No? I think one of the problems for a lot of our businessmen is the reforms, the procedures in Valenzuela City is different with the procedures in Tacloban, different in Cebu, different in Davao. This bill will harmonize all of the procedures in all local governments, and this is very important in standardizing the application of businesses at the local level. The second important reform, Mr. President, is the perennial problem with the Bureau of Fire and Protection. And tama ho si Chairman na nagiging money-making activity na lang po ng fire inspectors itong fire safety and inspection certificate. And a lot of our LGUs are actually confused which regulation they will follow in terms of getting fire safety inspection certificate. And number three is the use of automation. I think this is really important at this day and age, Mr. President. Only 30% of our LGUs are actually computerized. 70% still use the mano-mano index card system, of which it's prone to corruption, it's prone to error, and definitely will take months before you can get your simple business permit. So let me laud the chairman of the trade and industry, and because of citing Valenzuela numerous times, may bonus ka sa akin. Thank you, Mr. President.
May be allowed to just answer quickly the manifestation. That's true, Mr. President. I did not get any monetary considerations for mentioning him several times. As a matter of fact, hindi rin niya nagpakain sa amin, but we actually went to the city of Valenzuela to observe. My staff went there to observe. Hindi siya nagpakain doon. Pero to be honest, Mr. President, I'm sure the good gentleman from Valenzuela earned his stripes as a senator, earning him a seat in the Senate because of the quality of local governance that they've given in the city of Valenzuela. So with that, Mr. President, I could take other interpellations, or we can ask them to study it further, Mr. President, so that we can discuss. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you.
Yes, I'm sorry, Mr. President, but I do not wish to open the period of interpellation. We just allowed the manifestation.
Yes.
There is a co-sponsorship speech to be delivered by the minority leader tomorrow, and I have promised Senator Pangilinan and Senator Recto that they will be first on top on the list today. So I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1233 under Committee Report Number 8, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, do we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number
I'm sorry, no.
1311?
1311, sorry.
1311 under Committee Report number 33.
Yes.
Okay, so suspended in consideration.
Mr. President, I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1233 under Committee Report Number 8.
Any objection? There being none, we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 1233 under Committee Report number 8.
Mr. President, this is the measure on creating the Coconut Farmers and Industry Trust Fund. The parliamentary status of the measure is that we're still in the period of interpellation. This is I think, the third day of the interpellation of the minority leader on the chairman of the Committee on Agriculture and Food. So may I move to recognize Senator Francis Pangilinan and to interpellate Senator Recto, the minority leader. Next, Mr. President, is Senator Gordon and Senator Escudero.
Senator Pangilinan as sponsor and Senator Recto are both recognized to continue with the interpellation.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would the distinguished chairman of the committee yield to a few questions?
Willingly to the minority leader, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, we left off yesterday discussing, we left off with Republic Act 6260, which was done in June of 1971. This was the beginning of the Coco Levy, and this is the first time that the Coconut Investment Fund was created, similar to what we have today, based on the bill, to create another coconut trust fund. Moving forward, Mr. President, and based on the interpellations yesterday, we collected in a decade from 1971 to 1981, roughly 158 million. Okay?
That is correct.
Yes. Mr. President, what was the next law that was passed, or the presidential decree that established the coconut industrial processing incentives for greater coconut industrial processing and tariffs on copra? This was in June 1973, the PD 230. Is that correct?
There were several other PDs before that, Mr. President, but what is two? But yes, PD 276 was enacted in August of 1973. May we have the PD, Mr. President, the mentioned by the
The
minority
first
leader?
PD, well, June of 1971 was the Republic Act. May Kongreso pa nun.
That is correct.
In 1973, martial law na to.
That's correct.
And there's a PD 230 and PD 232.
230.
Could you explain PD 230, Mr. President?
Can we have a minute suspension, Mr. President? 230 and
232.
Session is suspended.
Andun sa PCG. Yung PCG document. I-check nyo yung 230, pero itong 232. Teka. Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Yes, Mr. President, what we have on record is the issuance of PD 232 on June 30, 1973, which created the Philippine Coconut Authority, the PCA, and the PCA's mandate was to promote accelerated growth and development of the coconut and other palm oil industry so that the benefits of such growth shall accrue to the greatest number and to provide continued leadership and support in the integrated development of the industry.
Okay.
The decree also consolidated the responsibilities and the activities of the CCC, the Coconut Coordinating Council, the Philippine Coconut Administration, or the PhilCoA, and the Philippine Coconut Research Institute, or PhilCoRIN, under one office, which, and this office, took over the collection of the levy,
Okay.
of the cocoa levy.
Okay. So this is the first time that the Philippine Coconut Authority has been established.
That is correct, the Philippine Coconut Authority.
And today you still have the PCA.
That is correct, Mr. President.
And today the PCA is under what office?
Under Executive Order Number 1, it is placed under the Office of the Cabinet Secretary, Mr. President.
So that means under the office of the President.
That is correct.
Okay?
Prior to that, Mr. President, it was under OPAFSAM, also under the Office of the President.
Yes. So let's look at it this way, Mr. President. You have the Cocoa Levy Fund, and now you have the PCA already. So both institutions are in place.
That is correct. The Cocoa Levy Fund is with the Treasury. And then you
No, I'm saying that this is the first time in our history that you already have a Cocoa Levy Fund
Okay,
established, which was collected. The first was from the farmers.
that is correct.
And the first time that you have the PCA
That
to
is correct.
administer the funds.
In 1973, June 30,
Okay.
yes.
Now, in your bill, we're doing the same thing. You're establishing a Cocoa Levy Trust Fund, and we're creating another committee in spite of the PCA being there under the office of the president. So there will be three entities right now present.
Yes, Mr. President, but the bill provides for the composition of the trust fund committee will be 6 representatives from the coconut farmers sector.
Yeah.
In other words, this is not the case today, Mr. President. We believe that the current situation does not allow for an inclusive
So your point is that you want more private sector representatives.
more coconut farmers
Yes,
participation,
more in the
Mr.
private
President.
sector.
The reason why
So why not just amend the PCA and include more farmers representatives in the board?
Well, Mr. President, if we do this, and that the PCA is under the office of the President, the other consideration then would be the capacity of the Philippine Coconut Authority in pursuing the coconut enterprise roadmap, coconut industry development, where we believe the PCA may need the expertise, for example, of the Department of Trade and Industry, as well as the Department of Finance. We believe that the PCA is not, at this juncture, the PCA is not capacitated, for example, to be able to provide the necessary decision-making in terms of where the investments are to be placed, how the funds are to be invested so that you can get the best yields, Mr. President. And that's why we would like to have the Department of Finance in that interagency committee, as well as the Department of Trade and Industry.
Yeah, we will get to that later on, Mr. President. Now, all I'm trying to establish, Mr. President, is that in 1971, we already created a trust fund of some sort for coconut farmers, and we collected this from the farmers.
That is
Okay?
right.
And then we already created again an entity called the Philippine Coconut Authority to plan for the development of the coconut industry.
Yes.
Okay? And there were already private sector representatives also when we created the PCA.
Yes.
Okay? Now, a year after that, there was another PD that was crafted. Is that correct? Or a few months after.
The PD 276, is that PD 276, Mr. President?
Yes.
Yes. Where is PD 276? PD 276, establishing a coconut consumer stabilization fund.
So this is another fund.
So that was the second level local.
Yes, Mr. President, that would be a second levy. This was enacted in August of 1973. At that time, Mr. President, there was an escalation. There was a crisis in the abnormal situation of world markets for fats and oils, which resulted in dislocation of prices and challenges of supply in the domestic market for coconut-based consumer goods. And this created hardships for the consumers. Therefore, the PD was created to respond to this situation. And apart from the powers given to the PCA under PD 232, PD 276 added an additional levy of 15 pesos per 100 kilograms of copra, or resicada or its equivalent, Mr. President. So there was an additional levy of 15 pesos per 100 kilograms of copra. And the
this was-
proceeds would be placed in the Philippine National Bank to the account of the Coconut Consumer Stabilization Fund. So a
So-
new fund, a separate
So,
fund
a
was
separate
created.
fund. And this was collected from whom, Mr. President?
Mr. President, according to the PCA here, this was collected from the millers.
And how much was collected, Mr. President?
15 pesos per 100 kilos.
How much was the total collection, Mr. President?
Around 6. From PD 276, Coconut Consumer Stabilization Fund, 6.6 billion, Mr. President.
And this was collected for how many years, Mr. President?
7 years, Mr. President. Around 7 years, up to 1980, Mr. President.
Okay. So from the millers, 6.2 billion, and from the farmers, 158 million.
At that point, yes, Mr. President.
Okay. What followed next, Mr. President?
Mr. President, a third levy, Mr. President,
PD
was
1699.
imposed under PD
Around 699, sir.
1699. This was creating the CIDF.
Mr. President, I
Okay.
think
May-
a few months thereafter, in February of 1974, because you're jumping to 1980.
Oh, sorry, Mr. President.
PD 1858.
Sorry, we stand corrected. Ano siya? PD? Dami yung numero, ah. I'm hearing several numbers here, Mr. President. Baka pwede itaya sa loto ito.
You need suspension?
No, we're okay, Mr. President. PD 414. That would be
I think a few months before that, there was an EO.
May we have the EO number, Mr. President, so that we
EO 425,
EO 4
February of 1974. Created premium duties higher on copra than processed coconut products. So duties naman to,
Okay,
Mr. President.
EO, yes,
Ah.
EO 425, February 17, 1974, imposing premium duty on certain export products.
For the record, could you explain to the committee how this worked?
Well, Mr. President, based on the Executive Order 425, it amended PD 230 and established duties on wood products, logs, lumber, plywood, veneer, mineral products, plant and vegetable products, which included copra, desiccated coconut oil, copra meal or cake, and coconut oil, Mr. President. So there was an additional,
What was the purpose of this duty, Mr. President?
Mr. President, this is an export duty. There shall be levied, assessed, and collected a premium duty on the difference between the current price, as established by the Bureau of Customs, and the base price of the product. So it's an export products premium duty.
Okay.
It's a
And
tax.
who paid for this, Mr. President?
The exporters, Mr. President, if I understand it correctly.
Okay. And how much was collected from this, Mr. President?
Do we have the data for that? Mr. President, we don't have the figures as to how much was collected here, but the information that has been relayed to us is that this did not form a separate fund.
So this went inside
The Treasury.
the Coconut Investment Fund.
May we have a minute suspension, Mr. President?
Session is suspended. Pwede tawagin siya.
Where did it go? No, but ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Yes, Mr. President, the information relayed to us by the industry, the PCA, is that this fund was not separated. In other words, this was not placed in any coconut industry fund, Mr. President.
So this is not part,
No. That is our understanding, Mr. President.
all the collections from the exporters, the duties were not part of the CCSF or the Coconut Investment Fund?
No, Mr. President.
Not a single peso.
That is what our representatives from the PCA.
Okay. Then why did government collect premium duties if it will not form part of the fund?
Just to raise more revenue, Mr. President, for the National Treasury, I would assume. But not for it to be placed in a special trust fund for the coconut industry.
Okay. And what happens next, Mr. President?
Mr. President, after this EO, we have PD 414, which amended PD 232. This is in 1974 April. The management of the fund from the Philippine Consumer Stabilization Committee was transferred to the PCA. And then there was an increase in the levy to 100 pesos per 100 kilograms of copra, Mr. President. So PD 232 was amended, Mr. President.
Okay. In addition to that,
In the same year, Mr. President, another fund was established. It amended again PD 232, the Coconut Industry Development Fund, by PD 582.
yeah. But before that, Mr. President, in PD 414, isn't it that the CCSF collections were authorized to be used to invest already in processing plants? Dito na nag-umpisa.
That is correct, 414.
Okay. So what processing plants did government purchase, Mr. President?
What processing plants? Ma'am. Mr. President, based on may we have a minute suspension?
Session suspended.
Baka naman isa lang. Oh, yun. Where are the pleadings? Pero yung sinasabi ni Senator Ralph na processing plants. Okay, wala yun sa PD 414. Hindi PD 414 yan. Wala rin 414 dito. Wala rin 414. Saan? Pero walang PD 414. So ano yung tinatanong niya is PD 414. Are you sure? Huh? What did you see there? There. Can I see? Yeah, but 414. Yes. Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Yes, Mr. President, under PD 414, initially, Mr. President, PD 414 was used to make purchases for the PCA. And it was first with fertilizers and other implements. However, eventually, Mr. President, the CCF was also crucial for the acquisition of the First United Bank, for example, which eventually became the United Coconut Planters Bank.
So those investments came from the CCSF
That is correct, Mr. President.
or from the Coconut Investment Fund?
The CCSF, Mr. President.
Okay. But prior to the purchase of the bank, PD 582 establishes the Coconut Industry Development Fund.
That's correct. In November of 1974, PD 582, which again amended PD 232, established another fund, the Coconut Industry Development Fund.
So this is the third fund already, Mr. President.
That is correct.
All
and-
for the benefit of coconut farmers.
That is correct. It was intended to finance the establishment and the operation of a hybrid coconut seed nut farm.
Okay. And a replanting program. Is that correct?
That is correct, Mr. President.
Okay. So what happens next, Mr. President?
Mr. President, that's November 1974. In 1975, July, another PD was enacted, PD 755.
No, before that, you had PD 623.
PD
623.
PD 623.
Which reorganized the composition of the PCA board.
Yes. That is correct.
Now you have already more farmers' representatives.
Is that right? Well, just one farmer representative today, Mr. President. So,
No, in PD 623, what was the composition of the PCA board then? Meaning to say that you could change, of course, the composition of the board at any given time, right? In fact, it moved throughout
well,
the
that
years.
is correct. By way of legislation, yes. And in this case, a PD.
PD. Walang kongreso nun di ba? Okay. So you had more private sector representatives already in the board.
May we have a minute suspension, Mr. President?
Session suspended.
Can you check again? So, go ahead. We're ready, Mr. President.
Session resumed.
Mr. President, the PD 623 reorganized the governing board, Mr. President, of the PCA. The corporate powers and duties of the authority, which is the Philippine Coconut Authority, shall be vested in and exercised by a board to be composed of 7 members. Chairman, who shall act as chairman of the board, president, both of the PNB, who shall be ex officio members, and the remaining 5 members to be appointed by the President from the recommendations of the following: 3 members recommended by the Philippine Coconut Producers Federation, 1 member recommended by the United Coconut Association of the Philippines, and 1 member recommended by the owner and operator of the hybrid coconut seed nut farm, Mr. President.
Okay, so 7 members, 5 private sector representatives.
Yes,
More private than government.
3, 4, 5. Yes.
Okay? Okay. And then a year after, a few months thereafter, so the point I'm just driving at here, Mr. President, is similar to what you have today, although yours is 13 and 7 private sector, even way back then, mas marami ng private sector representatives.
Well, that is correct, Mr. President, but, well, just a slight correction. It's 11, and 6 are actually farmers' representatives.
Yes. So in this case, many of them were also farmers' representatives,
Well, I think in theory,
to whom the levy
because
was
it said,
collected also.
producers,
Yes,
and,
which are farmers.
well, not necessarily farmers. It would include millers,
Yes.
industry,
Because the money came from farmers, millers, and exporters.
that is correct. But,
In fact, do we know if any of them are alive today?
we can check, Mr. President, but, right now we don't have the information.
Okay. Now, chances are, none of them are alive today, or many of them are not alive today.
Most likely, Mr. President.
Okay? So moving on, you mentioned in July of 1975,
Oh, Senator Enrile was part of the board, so,
correct. No, those who contributed to
Oh.
the Coco levy.
that is correct, most likely, Mr. President.
Yes, okay. So July of 1975, this is what you mentioned earlier, PD 755 authorized them now to purchase First United Bank, again for the benefit of coconut farmers,
Yes, Mr. President, that is correct.
okay? Using the CCSF fund.
Yes.
Okay, would you know how much was utilized to purchase the First United Bank?
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. President, the First United Bank, around, yes, a fund of 115 million was used to buy the controlling equity interest of First United Bank. So that was 115,520,000.
Yes. Who were the owners of First United Bank?
The family of Pedro Coanco, Mr. President.
The family of Pedro Coanco. And who is Pedro Coanco?
He's the owner.
How is he related to Danding Coanco?
He is the uncle, Mr. President.
How is he related to the former president?
Great-grand-uncle? I guess, yeah. You mean, there are 2 former presidents.
President, yeah, any of the two.
Well, President Aquino, the mother, would be an uncle, right? The uncle of President Cory Aquino. That uncle. So he would be the grand uncle of former President Benigno Aquino III.
Okay. Okay, and the family had interest in this bank.
Until they sold it. That's
Yes.
right.
Yes.
Oh, they still have very small shares, very small percentage of shares, Mr. President. Less than 1%.
Mr. President, may I make a point of order?
Senator Gordon is recognized.
Mr. President, these are very complicated matters. The historical antecedents alone are legion. And it's almost difficult for any member of the Senate, even for a person like me who's familiar to a certain extent with the fund, to follow through. There are matters that are highly technical, for example, the Supreme Court's decisions on making it a public fund or how the fund was spent. We have to really come up with an organizational chart, if you will, and we have the government here to do that for us. Why are we, it's called death by confusion. I mean, I'm glad Senator Recto has really done his homework. I have a long list of details there, and I'm asking my staff now to create a chart so that we can follow all these things, so that we could really follow how the country was gypped, if you will. If you want to say that the country was gypped, it was because of all these legal technicalities that were brought about. And now we're about to create another organization, which
That is
Senator Recto
precisely
and
my
I-
point. That's why I'm bringing out all of these issues,
Precisely.
sir.
We discussed this with Senator Recto, and I said, maybe we're putting the fund in another pocket, to another pocket that
That
creates
is
another
precisely the
bureaucracy.
point, Mr. President.
And
We're only in July of 1975.
That's correct. And there have been many, it's like a chameleon. It keeps changing in form. And we want to be able to follow it so that we could really set aside. You're talking about 75 billion, which is equivalent to a Marshall Plan, if you're going to invest it. And the issue really is, are we going to give it to the farmer? Or are we going to have somebody, another department or another agency run the fund?
Manage the fund, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Manage and invest.
Manage, that has been done. They even created a bank. They even put in, allegedly, the Coco Fed. They even put up all kinds of other people to run this fund. I'm not going to intervene. I think Senator Recto is doing a damn good job in asking the right questions. And you can see, with all due respect to the staff from Coconut Authority, that they themselves are hard put. I mean, we have to stop and go. And then we go and then stop again. Because you really have to come up with a highway or a timeline upon which these events transpired so that we can better transpire. We would like to know how the fund grew. I mean, I could ask a question, for example, right now and say, it ain't that bad. I think Senator Recto already asked it. I mean, from a start of what, 7 million, you grew to 75 billion and 91 billion, including assets. That ain't bad in any investment language. I mean, why are we trying to intervene when the fund has grown? And how sure are we that the fund will continue to grow? And that the poor farmers are going to ask, when is it going to come to us?
That is the point, Mr. President.
Which is
That is precisely the point, Mr.
The
President.
end all of this objective.
Yes.
I can tell you there's a gentleman here who can show you his receipts. I have people who come to me and say, I have Coco Fund receipts. But they'll never see it. They'll never see the light of day. So,
Unless you put a provision in the bill that those who have a receipt, they can get it back in cash if we want them to get it
that
back.
is a good point.
Yes.
This is like the veterans' claims which I worked on
Correct. Oh.
in my first term as senator, and we had a hard time getting into the American Senate to try and get them to pay our veterans. You know why? Because there was a Missouri fund after the war, and every Tom, Jerk, and Harry wanted to make sure that they would be part of the veterans so that they can get something from the promised funding of President Roosevelt. And when that became so many, the veterans were not able to get their money until about 2009, I believe it was, where President Obama put it as a rider along with Senator Inouye and Akaka of Alaska, and with the prodding of this representation, the prodding of President Gloria Macapagal-Arroyo and the veterans, we were able to get $900 and $9,000 and $15,000 respectively to a set of people. And up to now, Mr. La Chica of the Philippine American Group was here the other day, and now they're saying, oh, we have to give the children of the veterans, because the list keeps growing and growing. So I think if we have an overview of the chart, we will be doing the country a service so that we can all follow it and we can then proceed to making sure that we make the right decisions. Because I'm sure 90% of our people here, except for perhaps Senator Dillon, he and I were in Accra together, although I was not part of the Coconut Fund, he would understand it better than I would. But I think for the sake of our Senate, I think we should really try and get the Coconut Authority or the people of the Coconut groups here to give us a streamlined chart so that we can all follow. Because there are permutations that occur. Every time they go into a bump, they will create an adjustment. This is an analysis of how
Correct.
to make the law work for those who are smart. And sometimes I wonder, they're really smart and a half because they were able to raise this much money. And now we're trying to say, okay, I think it ain't bad that they were able to raise money. The only problem is we don't know who to give that money to now. That is the problem. So, Mr. President, I'd like to make that request, if that's possible, so that we could intelligently discuss this bill and that we can help the sponsor see his way clear in charting these things so that all of us can understand it, if that is possible.
Most certainly, Mr. President, we will have the staff put together the flow or the
Chart.
The chart.
And therefore, in the meantime, Mr. President, without the chart, and it's better for all our members in the Senate to be able to see how this progressed over time,
Okay,
what
the-
changes were made.
Can the
Maybe we
gentleman
should-
from Olongapo please restate your request?
Well, my request is for the staff supporting the good sponsor, Senator Pangilinan, to prepare a historical chart of all the antecedents that occurred. How the PDs created institutions or agencies like the funds, the CCIF, the Coconut Stabilization Fund, the UCPB, and all these, so that we know the money trail.
Guided by the line of questioning of Senator Recto.
That's correct. That's correct. Because Senator Recto is doing a yeoman's job, so that we know how the money was raised. And I was going to ask the same question. That's why I said I think if we did that, I might be doubling. I might be doing a double take on the questions. So, excuse me. Excuse me. So I think it would benefit everybody if we had that chart. Because I can hear the conversations there. When Senator Recto asks a question, they don't really know how it came about, and they have to look. And it's so exasperating, Mr. President. So I would like to ask that it be given, and until that time, we should hold on to the interpolations because it would benefit everybody if everybody was on the same page, knowing what's going on.
Can Senator Pangilinan please respond to the request of the
May
gentleman?
we have a minute suspension?
Session suspended.
Iba na.
Request lang pala na ano. Chart pala. Chart. Chart.
Wait.
Just the historical antecedents are already several pages. I'm sorry, wala pa ako at that session.
So, can we do it by Monday? Otherwise, we won't want to stall it. Monday? Ha? Oo, kailangan. Anyway, Tuesday pa lang. So, tapos, tanong mo sa staff ni go over down and then what will happen is they will call again Senator Recto. He will lay the premise part of this interpellation, why I will make that presentation. Diba? So Monday, dapat siguro Monday ng 11 o'clock. Ha? Tapos we go through it. Ha? So if I have questions, I will also raise it. Okay? So Monday 11. Today is Tuesday. So we have... Okay?
Tapos itong yung meeting, yung vision, next.
O sige.
Ano yung next date? Yung vision.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session resume.
Yes, Mr. President, after conferring with Senators Recto and Gordon, we have agreed that we will suspend today's interpellation. And by Monday, Mr. President, we would be ready to continue with the interpellation, and we would provide the timeline and the chart as requested during the period of interpellation when we resume it on Monday, Mr. President. So, with the permission of Senators Recto and the Chair, we would like to move, and the Majority Leader, we would like to move for the suspension of the period of interpellation, Mr. President.
There's a motion to suspend interpellation committee report number 8 on Senate Bill number 1233. If there are no
Yes,
obje-
Mr. President, just to add, with the understanding that we will present the chart during the period, and we will resume the period of interpellation on Monday and present the said chart as requested.
If there are no objections, interpellation on committee report number 8 is hereby suspended.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and we'd like to thank Senators Recto and Gordon for their for the interpellation and their interventions.
Session suspended. Ano next dito?
What amendments will be made? To make sure that enough ng hypocrisy. Ito, gusto mo ba siya?
Val, suspend ko na to. Sa susunod yung kay Grace.
Yung traffic congestion crisis. Hindi. I'm not prepared today.
You can prepare today.
Ano, tuition na? Tuition? Apo, tuition na yata, Tito Sen. Tuition na, tuition. Ate Grace na.
Wala, hindi ka ready ngayon o hindi ka ganun ba? We're ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
With the permission of the body, Mr. President, I move to resume consideration of
The sponsor, Senator Poe and Senator Ontiveros, are recognized for interpellation.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would the good gentlewoman, my sister here in the Senate, be open to some clarificatory questions?
Of course, it will be my pleasure, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. The last sentence of Section 14 of the bill states that protest mechanisms under Article 17 of RA 9184 or the Government Procurement Reform Act may be disregarded by the traffic control manager. What mechanisms are then available for those who would like to question bidding and procurement process? Wouldn't the disregarding by the traffic control manager of protest mechanisms possibly render those processes open to corruption?
Well, Mr. President, aside from the fact that we are not removing due process, we are in fact expediting it because of the urgent nature of the traffic congestion crisis. We would like to do away with the long procurement process. However, as you know, although the lower courts may not have jurisdiction over this, any individual can still go to the Supreme Court if they have any questions regarding this. There are also guidelines as to which particular companies may be qualified in the first place, like they have to be sufficiently capitalized, they should have the necessary track record, etc. These are also some of the safeguards that we've put in place to make sure that it will not be subjected to corruption, or at least there's an arrest for possible corruption.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I thank the good gentlewoman for referring to something I was going to include in a later question, which was an indirect reference, for example, to Republic Act 8975, which already prohibits lower courts from issuing TROs against a government infrastructure project. And I was going to mention that in relation to a later question about achieving the same ends of the bill through a more effective and efficient implementation of existing laws. In any case, Mr. President, it is the hope of the good sponsor that these other mechanisms will take the place of the protest mechanisms in order to prevent any possible corruption.
Mr. President, there are two things that, well, more than two things, but the main things we are trying to achieve here is, number one, expediting the process, and number two, having transparency still. We are actually requiring them to be FOI compliant, and then we are not exactly making them immune to lawsuits, but this has to be something that can withstand the requirements for the Supreme Court. And so at least it will whittle away those unnecessary, frivolous bidding questions, or let's say a losing bidders, sour graping. And that's also one of the reasons why we are doing this. Transparency and right to information. In Section 24, there will be a separate website for the publication of complete and accurate information on all matters relating to the EP bill. This shall include, among others, not just the publication of traffic-related policies, but also the status of priority projects from its negotiation to implementation. And, Mr. President, actually, we have a Congressional Oversight Committee that will be meeting on a regular basis. Well, this is open to suggestion also to the body, if it needs to be a quarterly basis, a monthly basis, so that we can assess at which point certain contracts or negotiations are in the process. When we say we are removing the protest mechanisms, we mean that proponents need to exhaust the administrative remedies, do not need to exhaust the administrative remedies such as going to the BAC before going to court.
Thank you, Mr. President. So before I move to my next question, I'd just like to clarify, to be sure that since, for example, as the good gentlewoman gave the example of losing bidders would already be prohibited from going to lower courts, but so would this mean that any entity which wished to raise any protest would need to go all the way up to the Supreme Court?
Yes, Mr. President. That is actually the main intention of this bill, is so that to do away with the hindrances of a lower court TRO. Now, the Supreme Court, as you know, can still issue a temporary restraining order, but I feel that the ones that are not so serious, the Supreme Court will basically not, well, the Supreme Court won't give them the time of day, but we still have that court of last resort.
Thank you, Mr. President. Section 16A of the bill suspends for the duration of the act provisions of the Local Government Code requiring prior consultation with and approval of local government units.
Yes.
Mr. President, with respect to traffic-related projects within their respective localities. Does this mean that the traffic control manager can, for example, change land use plans by local governments for traffic-related projects, even over the objections of local governments, or even without consulting the local government units? Kasi hindi po ba mahalaga pa rin ang konsultasyon man lang dahil yung road networks maliban sa national roads ay nasa pangangasiwa rin naman ng mga LGUs?
Mr. President, in fact, this is what we are trying to do here. Yes, let me be bold enough to say that we will suspend certain powers of the local government, and not just that, other government agencies that issue permits will not have the authority to do so in cases that will be identified as part of this plan. But number one, the ones that will be approved have to go through NEDA approval. Therefore, it is a study that's been exhausted or at least undertaken, and it will take into account, yes, certain land areas that may not have been zoned for roads or for whatever else, but it may be converted because, as you know, even the government's right to procure land will be expedited in this case. So I don't see any conflicts there. Now, what will be the role of the LGUs under the emergency powers? Number one, they will coordinate with the traffic crisis manager on the opening of private roads for public use. Number two, they will coordinate with the traffic crisis manager on the implementation of projects that will facilitate the ease of traffic in the metropolitan areas, because their inputs as to the bottlenecks within their area is still the source of information that will be the basis for the decision of the traffic manager. Because how will the traffic manager really know, for example, the problem of relocating informal settlers in Quezon City? He will always need to refer to the local government for this. And in fact, with this emergency powers, we are going to give and empower the local government financially to be able to fix the problems on informal settlers and other obstacles to laying out the traffic solutions. They will also coordinate with the traffic crisis manager in the crafting of a uniform traffic code, and then they will form part of the interagency task force. So they will still have a seat in the in the implementation of the projects, and also in the enforcement of the new traffic policies. And they will also coordinate with the MMDA on land use planning, and this is in Section 9, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. So, but within that range of powers which will still remain with or additionally be given to LGUs, the absolute power over local land use plans may be diminished.
Yes.
May be diminished. Thank you, Mr. President. Section 16, before I go to that, since the good gentlewoman mentioned already the informal settlers, Section 17 of the bill states that in the case of land occupied by informal settler families, the implementing agency shall not take possession of the property until such ISF family shall have been transferred to a temporary or permanent relocation site. These provisions shall not preclude the NHA from formulating and implementing long-term resettlement plans for ISFs or from carrying out its mandate. Does this provision effectively suspend the provisions of RA 7279 or the UDHA, Urban Development and Housing Act, which lays down the mandatory guidelines for eviction or demolition, such as, again, consultations, this time with the informal settler families, 30-day notice prior to demolition, and the like? And good gentlewoman, would you be open to an amendment that explicitly refers to the provisions of RA 7279 and maintains the safeguards in Section 28 therein?
I think we're just really fast-tracking the process. The consultation process under UDHA will still be respected, but periods will be shortened in order to fast-track the process. The DILG is the agency that is in charge of implementing the UDHA, may be made part of the Traffic Advisory Council. Perhaps Senator Risa would like to propose this amendment. The NHA is part of the council. The traffic manager can compel the LGUs to make a list of empty or abandoned properties within cities and pursue these properties for relocation sites. Additional funding will be given to the implementing agencies for relocations of informal settlers. Now, Mr. President, it doesn't mean that just because they are settled in a particular place to facilitate, let's say, the construction or the load or the clearing of a particular land, that they will be there permanently. They will be allowed to have a more suitable permanent place, but in the meantime, to fast-track the process, they may have to be in a temporary but safe place. And this will be part of the consultation, this will be part of the agreement given to the informal settlers that in the interim period, they may not exactly have all of the amenities that, of the permanent relocation site that they might need.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll certainly consider, and I thank the good gentlewoman for her suggestion, which I will certainly consider as an input in formulating the amendment that I will propose to her at the proper time. Would the good gentlewoman be open to such an amendment that, just to reiterate, explicitly refers to the safeguards in Section 28 of the UDHA?
1 minute suspension, Mr. President.
A minute suspension.
Mr. President,
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, we will ask the representative of the DILG to present their position on this, and we will take this up together with the proposed amendments of the beautiful gentlewoman. From where? From, is it Capiz?
Yes, Panay Island, yes.
Okay.
Thank you,
Senator.
Mr. President. I will eagerly await that process. To continue, Mr. President, Section 16E of the bill likewise suspends for the duration of the Act provisions of PD number 1586 and its IRR requiring an environmental clearance certificate from the DENR. Napakahalaga po ng ECC dahil dito tayo nakasisiguro na environmentally friendly ang ating transport infrastructure, transport technology. Would the good gentlewoman be amenable to an amendment that would retain the ECC requirement?
Mr. President, we will definitely not sacrifice the environment and natural resources for this, because if we do so, then we're just creating one problem after attempting to solve one. However, the DPWH, and I think this is true, we've experienced this, tells us that usually the ECC takes 6 to 7 months. The duration of this emergency powers, the Emergency Crisis Act, will be less than 3 years. So we need to really expedite the process, and permits, let's say, for tree cutting takes years. We would like to shorten the process, but consult stakeholders. Remember, even NEDA will vet this, but the senator perhaps could also propose that the DNR be a member of the advisory council. Because, Mr. President, what's sad is that even in the right-of-way issues that we have, or even in utilizing a particular land or a particular building, we will notice that it is one government agency against another government agency. When in fact, the reason why we are doing this is we are all in this together in a crisis. So I think that the least of our worries should be our own agencies throwing hurdles in front of us and rendering this emergency powers, if you may call it, or maybe an emergency crisis act, useless. So we will streamline this, And if they need to have a representative in the board or in the advisory council, then maybe that's one area that we need to put for safeguard.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I'd like to inquire if the good sponsor would be willing to request a position paper on this issue that I raised in interpellation from the DENR.
Yes, as long as they give it within the period of interpellation.
Thank you, Mr. President. Moving on to my next question. Section 16F of the bill suspends for the duration of the act provisions of the Labor Code of the Philippines requiring clearances and permits for the employment of foreigners with regard to foreign technicians and experts working in traffic-related projects. Hindi po ba tayo mag-i-impose ng kahit anong standards o framework sa pagpili? Gawa ng malimit sa balita ang mga Chinese companies, halimbawa, na hindi vetted at minsan pa sila'y nakakasama sa ilang mga skandalo dati sa mga government projects.
Mr. President, I share the concern of the good senator, and be assured that we have really taken this into consideration. But we don't have, again, this is always my favorite line, we don't have a monopoly of technical expertise. We shall fully support and implement a Filipino first policy. A MOA between DPWH and DOLE can be drafted to ensure that Filipinos who can fulfill the requirements for labor will be considered first. Safety nets will be put in place before any project is launched. All projects will be published online, and perhaps the labor requirements can also be published so laborers can apply. But the sad reality is this. For certain technical matters, we don't have the experts here in the country, certain engineers, certain architects that can give us world-class advice or maybe technology transfer. We need to be able to probably hire from other countries. But even as we look for people to fill in certain positions, because of the brain drain, we've exported sometimes our best workers abroad. And when we're looking for plumbers, when we're looking for masons, we don't even have enough here in our country. I'm not saying that this is the level that we're going to need these from other countries, but I would expect, Mr. President, that it will be more on technical labor or maybe transfer technology that we will be needing foreign workers.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm glad to hear again the assurance of the good gentlewoman in the case of technical experts, but I'm also concerned about blue-collar workers.
Yes.
Because we have had cases in the past of some foreign companies, or particularly Chinese companies, who bring in also their own blue-collar workers, effectively displacing our own blue-collar workers from that part of the employment.
Yes, you know what? As I mentioned, I share that concern. A Filipino first policies for laborers will be pushed here. That's why we will have perhaps we can have a memorandum of agreement with the DOLE that in any project they should at least, publish this online or in a publication that will say that we need this many workers, and only after a certain number of a certain period of time that we cannot have fill the demand, the reasonable demand that they have, then perhaps we will consider others. But laborers are usually Filipinos because it is expensive for them to source aliens to work blue-collar jobs unless they're captives, as in the case of trafficking, labor trafficking. As we've seen, they're contained in one particular area, clandestine operations. But I think out in the open, it will be quite difficult. But again, I believe that the safeguard should be in place. So there should be a memorandum of agreement between DOLE and the council.
Thank you, Mr. President. Most of the, and I hope the good sponsor will recall, I raised this next concern even in the hearings on the bill. Most of the powers of the traffic crisis manager are already being exercised by various government agencies. So for instance, the Land Transportation Franchising and Regulatory Board is already empowered to prescribe and regulate routes and issue, amend, revise, suspend, or cancel certificates of public convenience. And then particular to National Capital Region, we could talk about the Metro Manila Development Authority. The President himself also has the power of control over all executive departments, bureaus, and offices, including the authority to reorganize government offices or units. And this power allows him to create interagency task forces and formulate, coordinate, and monitor policies, standards, and programs being implemented by the government. So, just to put this question one last time to the good sponsor, rather than create a new bureaucratic structure integrating all these powers, wouldn't it be more expeditious for the President to exercise his power of control to achieve the same purpose, with these agencies exercising their current regular powers optimally to address our traffic crisis in Metro Manila, for example?
Mr. President, this is not another layer of bureaucracy, if you will look at the intention of this particular bill. What it is harmonizing and putting together in one reference all the laws that will benefit the solution for the traffic. In fact, when we say the President has the power to declare a state of emergency, or he has an emergency powers granted by Congress, we need to define that traffic is actually a national emergency. You know, if you have typhoons or if you have earthquakes, of course, that will constitute a natural calamity and an emergency. Losing 3 billion pesos a day plus constitute for us a national emergency. That's why all of these, although the President already may have some of these powers, in fact, also alternative sources of procurement are already laid out, but we need to put them together, harmonized in one law, so that not only do they have all of these other privileges or other powers, there are also safety measures involved, and then there are also certain things like, for example, number one, that the lower courts won't be able to pose as an impediment. There is a need to grant extraordinary powers because current laws do not adequately provide for the means to expeditiously and effectively solve the traffic and congestion crisis. For example, the law on procurement provides that alternative and thereby quicker methods of procurement may only be resorted to during exceptional cases. LGU development plans are approved with little or no consideration for their impact on traffic within their locality and nearby municipalities. Further, it is also apparent that the executive agencies are operating with little or no consultation among themselves and with other stakeholders, and without the benefit of a comprehensive strategic interagency plan. Aside from granting powers to the President, Mr. President, we will also compel the agencies involved here to submit a traffic action plan, which they don't have. So this will actually force them to do work beyond what they've been doing, and also provide them to be more transparent, and also to streamline the processes that we can perhaps do away with in the interest of the public.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I thank the good sponsor for mentioning that there are in fact already currently some alternate or alternative processes of procurement, which I'll return to at the proper time during the period of amendments. The substitute bill allows private and public entities and educational institutions to adopt and implement telecommuting, telelearning, telepresence, carpooling, share-a-ride programs, flexible working hours and school days, staggered schedules of attendance, and similar transport demand management schemes. Isn't the adoption of these policies already within the scope, for example, of a private employer's management perspective or prerogatives? Haven't the DepEd and CHED already issued regulations vis-a-vis homeschooling and distance education? If we want these policies to be adopted, shouldn't government be putting incentives in place instead, for example?
Yes, thank you for calling to us for bringing this up, Mr. President. In fact, it would be nice if we can just have TV monitors here and work from home, right? That will be 24 less cars on the road. But, you know, as we are trying to encourage them to do these things, like for example, flexible working hours, alternative education methods, etc., we also have to ensure that the infrastructure to make this possible are in place. For example, you want to work from home, but your internet service is too slow or too expensive. For that to be practical at all, you should have the right internet speed at an affordable price. Now, how can we get there? By working with telco companies. We ask them in our hearings, what can we do to speed up the internet speed and make our cellular our cellular signals better? We need more cellular sites. Okay, so what's the problem? For every local government, they have their own regulations on what it will take to build a cell tower. Okay, how many permits? I think 17 permits. The duration of that will take only a year. After that, you have to renew your permit again. It takes even as much as 800,000 pesos just to erect one cell site, just for the friction costs, meaning permits that are not, I wouldn't really say that necessary. Mr. President, even if they're able to erect that tower, who do you think will shoulder the 800,000 pesos for that tower? Us, the subscribers. So what I'm saying is, we are trying to do this. Number one, we need to speed up our internet speed. We're going to give them we're going to give them the opportunity not to have to deal with the local government for this in every single aspect. We will also make sure that certain subdivisions, for example, that won't open up. I know, okay, this will be the concern of the good senator because health. There's some subdivisions that will say, oh no, we can't have a cell site here because it's a question of health. Now, yes, if they can prove that, definitely, we will halt this. Even the Supreme Court, I'm sure, will listen to it with overwhelming evidence. But go around the country, you'll see that right on top of hospitals are cell sites. You can see several networks with the biggest television transmitter towers. Take a survey of the people around them. Are they more susceptible to being sick? So, Mr. President, I mean, maybe I digress too much, but what I'm saying is, alternative modes of work and education is really important, but we have to also support those that will opt to do this. You know, just recently, we suggested to the Department of Education to move their school break for Christmas a little earlier. They didn't even listen to us. Well, they did for maybe 2 days, and then they said, we can't do it because the calendar's already set. I thought we were supposed to each give what we can in our own way to solve the traffic problem, to give whatever we can, but then they seemed unbendable at that time. So we really need somebody to say, no, you need to be able to make your adjustments because we are experiencing a crisis right now. Maybe the traffic manager can say, no, DepEd, fix your calendar. Anyway, ang tawag ito, climate change na ngayon. Mas mainit pa nga ng December, di ba? Nauurong na yung tag-ulan. So, yung mga bagay na ganon. That's why, yes, we are for alternative modes of work and but look at that. How many government agencies, not frontline agencies, are still not adopting the 4-day work week? So that's where I'm coming from, Mr. President. 2 hours to get to work and 2.5 hours getting home.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the proper time, I may return to how to maximize the input of existing agencies with their existing mandates, in addition to the LTFRB and MMDA I mentioned earlier, such as DepEd and CHED, in addressing our traffic crisis. For my last question, RA number 10752, or the Act Facilitating Right-of-Way for Government Infrastructure Projects, already streamlines the acquisition of property and easements needed for national government projects. The same law can also be used to acquire the private roads and streets necessary to improve the traffic grid And in fact, the bill already expressly refers to RA number 10752. And I mentioned earlier, Mr. President, RA 8975, and the good sponsor discussed this, already prohibits lower courts from issuing TROs against government infrastructure projects. So, again, to put this question one last time to the good sponsor, could we not achieve the same ends of the bill through more effective and efficient implementation of the said laws?
You know, if we lived in an ideal world, we would say that everything should be implemented properly, as we already have like maybe the best laws. However, this is almost like, I don't know, it might sound a little trivial, but almost like a cliff notes of certain laws that we have. We take the salient points and then we put it together in reference to traffic alone. Now, because Mr. President, the duration of this is only less than 3 years now. After that, it will revert back to the old laws, so we can see if the old laws are actually obsolete, and then we can make those amendments later on. But it also actually limits the president in a way, because it states the guidelines that he needs to follow for these particular laws. For example, yes, you have that right-of-way acquisition, but here, effectively, we say, yes, the government can take over, and if that person or that company doesn't respond within 30 days, we will put the money in escrow. So that person is still protected, that person will still get what's rightfully his, and mind you, reinforcing your right from the good senator, what is already in the law, fair market value. Pero kung nagmamatigas pa rin, adi ayaw mo. O ito yung bayad, nasa escrow, bahala ka dyan. So, but this is for the interest of the greater good. We still need the EP bill because implementation is not as effective as having a traffic manager overseeing everything. Now, how will the government acquire rights of way? The traffic crisis manager or the implementing agency concerned is authorized to acquire rights of way project sites and relocation sites through negotiated sale as provided in RA 10752. If the registered owner of the property sought to be acquired as a right-of-way project, site or relocation site does not accept the offer of payment for his property within a period of 30 calendar days. So, all of these laws are, well, some of them are already are actually already laws, but we're just reinforcing it here, Mr. President, because of the duration that we need it. After the marathon hearings and technical working groups, we heard from the agencies that one of the biggest challenges to infrastructure is acquiring rights of way. Yung iba hindi pinapapasok, Mr. President, dun sa, kunyari, meron isang building dyan na kailangan kunin. How can we give them the valuation of their structure if they don't even allow the DPWH to enter? Relocation of informal settlers is a problem. This bill will improve RA 10752. There are points in the law that cause delay. For example, the need for appraisers accredited by the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. It's hard to find any. So they don't actually exist, Mr. President. So this is actually a point that they always raise if they want to sue the government.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will introduce amendments at the proper time, particularly with regards to ECC, foreign nationals, and most especially the protest or a protest mechanism. Yes, traffic is an emergency, but of course we all don't want to create another emergency. So traffic is an emergency, but the question remains for me, Mr. President, good sponsor, is the grant of emergency powers the solution? Thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you very much to the good sponsor for entertaining my questions.
Thank you, Mr. President. I willingly submit to whatever recommendations or amendments my colleagues will have. I feel, again, that the expertise of the concern or the advocacy on each and every one of us will contribute to have a more justifiable traffic crisis solution.
Thank you, Mr. President. There are other members who have signified their intention to interpolate the measure, but not today. So I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1284 under Committee Report number 24.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, consideration of committee report number 24 on Senate Bill number 1284 is hereby suspended.
Mr. President, with the permission of the body, I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1304 under Committee Report number 28.
Consideration in order.
This is the proposed measure on the Free Higher Education for All Act. The parliamentary status of the measure is we are in the period of interpellation. So I move to recognize the sponsor, the chairman of the Committee on Education, Arts and Culture, Senator Bam Aquino, and to interpellate Senator Panfilo Lacson, Mr. President.
Senator Aquino is
Meron ka na
recognized.
dito. Hindi ngayon. Next week na. In the meantime, I move to suspend the session for a minute, Mr. President.
Session suspended.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed. Senator Lacson is recognized.
Mr. President, before we begin, we'd like to manifest for the record that Senator Gordon has indicated his intention to be a co-author, and we gladly accept, Mr. President.
Senator Gordon is, has mentioned that
He wishes
wants
to be a co-author,
wishes to be
Mr.
co-author.
President.
Noted.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the distinguished sponsor of this laudable bill be willing to answer some clarificatory questions?
Of course, Mr. President.
At the outset, let me state for the record that this representation is foursquare behind this measure that is now being deliberated on the floor. But I'd like to think that the bottom line question actually, and the most basic question is, can we afford to abolish the tuition fees?
Yes, Mr. President, before I begin, let me just state for the record that the good gentleman from Cavite started the ball rolling when, as Vice Chairman of Finance, he worked with our Chairman of Finance to get the tuition fee subsidy funded for the 2017 budget, for the record. So yes, Mr. President, it is very possible for us to fund this. In fact, we've funded part of it already in the 2017 budget, even before passing this bill. So, Mr. President, there is already it's already a law, actually, to have this funded in the 2017 budget. However, Mr. President, we would like to note that we funded 8.3 billion for 2017, but in succeeding years, this will probably go up to about 16 billion pesos, Mr. President. And again, if we look at the increases in budget every year, Mr. President, this year's budget is 330 billion more than last year's budget. So it really is a matter of prioritization. And if I may quote our good minority floor leader, he did mention in his sponsorship speech that we are spending other amounts of even higher magnitudes, probably for matters which may not be even as important as education. So yes, Mr. President, we do have the funding. Yes, we have actually funded part of it already. And as a matter of priority, it seems that we can make that statement by passing this law that indeed education at the tertiary level is indeed important and should be prioritized, Mr. President.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. Kindly walk us through some statistics relevant to this particular bill
Yes.
under consideration. Like, what is the present state of the higher education in the country?
Yes, Mr. President, maybe on matters relevant to the bill, there are 1,648,566 current students in SUCs, Mr. President. If we pass the bill, they will be the recipients of a tuition fee subsidy. Currently, Mr. President, the computation is that that subsidy is roughly about 8,000. Roughly about 9,400 pesos per year per student, Mr. President. And that will amount to about 16 billion, around 16 billion pesos eventually, Mr. President. So this law, in effect, would mandate that we fund our students with this tuition fee subsidy. Now, Mr. President, the tuition fee, as compared to the total cost of a student, is roughly about 30 to, anywhere from 30 to 40% of the cost of a student. So we are still actually not funding completely the cost of education because there's still the 60 to 65% that they have to hurdle, which would be miscellaneous fees, traveling expenses, and even food, for example, Mr. President. So the 30 to 40% cost that they will be saving will in effect come from this law that that we're currently deliberating, Mr. President.
The 1.6 million figure was the testimony or the contribution of CHED, no? Last July. They used the July 2016 data.
Yes, Mr.
But
President.
when we check with the CHED website, it now runs to 1,884,984 enrollees, no? In all the SUCs. And we did some calculation. The average tuition fee per unit in SUC is 201 pesos, no? Of course, in varying amounts. UP, for example, ang binabayaran doon la 1,000.
Yes, Mr. President.
But some SUCs, especially in the provinces, may mga libre. But on the average, ang cost is 201 pesos per unit. And assuming that a student will enroll in 20 units, so that would make 201 times 20, that's 8,040. Tama ba yun? 8,040 per year. No? 8,040 pesos per year. And on a yearly basis, if we multiply that with 1.8 million plus, no, enrollees, that will eat up 15.155 billion pesos a year. And since 8 out of 10 students belong to the poorest of the poor, yan yata ang statistics, so it would amount to something like 12 billion 124 million pesos. So if that's the amount needed to subsidize the poorest of the poor students, 80% of the enrollees in SUCs. So initially we'll be needing at least 12 billion pesos.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. President, our computation, I'm not disputing the numbers, but our computation actually has it higher at close to 16 billion, Mr. President.
16 billion for 1.8 million or 1.6 as you
Actually,
earlier
1.6,
stated.
Mr. President.
So
Because,
that
Mr.
would
President-
be the high-end computation,
Yes,
maybe.
Maybe, Mr.
Because-
President, we can just consider that the high end, no?
What's the high-end number of units?
42
42 units.
annual, 21
That's
per sem,
annual.
42 per year, Mr. President.
Yeah, anyway, so the initial funding that you are proposing is 15 billion pesos to be sourced from the Presidential Social Fund. My question is Congress authorized to interfere in the disbursement of the Presidential Social Fund?
Well,
Baka
Mr.
po hindi po pwede because
Well, Mr. President, my understanding, Mr. President, is that we can, considering that all allocations of budget need to pass through Congress. However, Mr. President, we are not exactly particular about that funding source. No, we can just say from the GAA, Mr. President.
Yeah, but I don't think the Presidential Social Fund is part of the General Appropriations Act. No. It is not. It's not part.
Mr. President, I'm...
We can legislate to earmark portion of the... what is
PSF.
the total PSF? What is the total amount per year? PSF is sourced from PCSO and PAGCOR.
Yes, Mr.
right?
President.
So how much would that be on a yearly basis?
Mr. President, we're getting the data now,
Yeah.
but let me just say for the record that we're not precious about this funding source. I think if you wish, we can even amend it to just say General Appropriations Act.
Yeah,
And,
we can source it from the GAA.
Yes, Mr. President.
Okay. So the initial funding that that is needed is 16 billion
On the high end, Mr.
based on
President.
your computation
But however, Mr. President, we do have an 8 billion already that was allocated.
for 2017.
Yes, Mr. President.
But when we talk of 2018, we'll be needing at least 16 billion pesos.
Yes, Mr. President. Actually, Mr. President, some senators and I were speaking that the 8 billion can be for the first semester of the 2017 to 2018 school year.
Yes.
And then as we move on, we can correct that by funding the full year.
Because my concern is, naturally, the taxes of our citizens will be utilized to fund the pre-tuition program,
Yes.
right? And while European countries where providing pre-higher education is prevalent to have higher taxes, no, coupled with relatively low tertiary enrollment, if we follow this trend, then there will be a lot of opposition. So that's just my concern, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President, maybe to address that concern, Mr. President, is that without raising taxes, our budget has been increasing every year for the past 6 or 7 years by leaps and bounds. In fact, between 2016 and 2017, we increased by almost 300 billion pesos, Mr. President. That's 300 billion pesos that we, as the Senate and Congress, should allocate. And probably, Mr. President, 16 billion, which is around 5% of that increase, surely can go to this very important cause, Mr. President. So my point is we don't need to increase taxes, Mr. President. We can merely utilize our power of the purse to allocate and prioritize
Just to
properly
appropriate, yeah.
the increases which we really have every year, Mr. President.
I raise that concern because if we will not increase taxes or if we will not source it from the GAA, then we might be needing some, or the SUCs might need to increase some fees, you know, from the students, and it might defeat the purpose of the bill.
Yes, yes, Mr. President. We're very cognizant of that, Mr. President, and that concern was raised in our hearings. So to safeguard that, Mr. President, there's a definition of what tuition fee can cover, what other fees are covering, Mr. President, and such that you won't have a situation where nalibre nga yung tuition fee, tumrip na naman yung other fees, no? So,
Yes.
Mr. President, it's clearly defined what are under tuition fees, what are under other fees, and the increase in the other fees need JED approval anyway, Mr. President.
Of course, SUCs have their own other sources of income, no? And
Yes, Mr.
what are
President.
these revenue-generating activities or programs of SUCs? If I may?
It differs, Mr. President. Some SUCs have land that they lease out.
Corporatize, yeah.
Yes, Mr. President. For example, UP, for example, of course, they have vast tracts of land and there are some commercial areas there, so they are earning revenue from there, Mr. President. I am aware of Bukidnon State University, which also has massive tracts of land which are under some conflict also, Mr. President, but they have leased out some of this land to commercial interests, Mr. President.
And right now, SUCs are also charging the students, no?
Yes, Mr. President.
What other non-tuition charges are they imposing on the students?
Yes,
on the enrollees?
there's a generic term of other fees, Mr. President, but that includes miscellaneous fees.
How much would that be on the average per student, per year?
We have that number, Mr. President, if you can give us a second for that. But just to explain further, Mr. President, these are your laboratory fees, these are your engineering fees, Sometimes my fees, Mr. President, contribution for the student activities, they're basically lumped under other fees and miscellaneous expenses, Mr. President.
So on top of the 201 per unit per student, how much would that be per student? The other fees, non-tuition fees.
Mr. President, we're currently getting that. If you wish, Mr. President, we can suspend or we can move on and I can get back to you with the answer, Mr. President.
We can proceed while they're getting the data. Yeah, we have some data here.
Yes, Mr. President.
From the 2017 budget of expenditures and sources of financing, sa SUC, ang for 2015, 9.5 billion. Estimated income in 2016 is 8.3. And the projected income for 2017 is 7.7. I'm just wondering, why is this declining? The source is the BSF, no, which is part of the 2017 budget.
Yeah, Mr. President, because of the K-12, there is declining enrollment for the next 2 years. And then in the following years, once the grade 12 students graduate, it will normalize.
Yeah, I understand.
So there is a decline in the succeeding years, Mr. President.
So if they're getting projecting to get 7.78 billion in 2017, 8.3 billion estimated in 2016, ano ba to? As I asked earlier, what are these non-tuition charges aside from laboratory fees? Because medyo malaki ito.
Yes, Mr.
Considering
President.
that we have 1.8 million enrollees and the SUCs are collecting 9.5 and then 8.3 for this year.
Yes, Mr. President.
Medyo malaking burden yata.
Malaki siya, Mr. President, no? And in fact, they are probably at the same level as the tuition fees, Mr. President, but they do represent what is known as other fees, which includes what I had mentioned earlier, Mr. President. We can get a breakdown from CHED, Mr. President, on what are these fees, but suffice it to say, these are other fees apart from tuition that the SUCs need to provide the instructions to the students, Mr. President.
Yeah, on another matter, do all SUCs currently cater to the maximum number of students that they can accommodate?
Mr.
May cap
President,
ba ito?
that is a very interesting question, Mr. President, because as early as a few months ago, that is a question we posed to CHED, and they were not able to provide a specific answer to that. No? Some SUCs, Mr. President, anecdotally, will tell you that they don't put a cap to enrollment on their non-quota courses, but they have a cap on enrollment for their quota courses. And in short, Mr. President, this is the concern of actually the private sector, that it becomes a black hole, no? Because wala pong controls. No? If you notice, Mr. President, in the bill, one of the provisions there is actually to finally state publicly what are the what is the capacity of every SUC. So that every year, Mr. President, when we budget, malinaw na kung magkano yung kailangan nating iset aside. The other concern kasi, Mr. President, is that if they don't put a cap, they might be accepting students even if their facilities cannot accommodate students anymore. So we have stories, Mr. President, of classrooms under the tree or overburdened buildings because wala ngang cap. So we're looking, Mr. President, at some reform as well with our SUCs alongside this bill to also try to address that capacity issue by pegging already what their capacity is per course, whether quota or non-quota, so we can plan better with them, Mr. President.
Yes, especially when we pass this bill, when we enact this into law, there will be a sudden rise in the influx of enrollees.
No, in fact,
And,
Mr. President,
I just hope that we can, or the SUCs can cope with the sudden rise in the number of enrollees.
in fact, Mr. President, to stave off that supposed rise, which was also raised by the private sector as a concern, they must register with CHED their capacity. So that at the end of the day, Mr. President, malinaw kung ilan talaga yung kaya nila. And it's public knowledge on how many enrollees every SUC can accommodate.
Yeah, under Section 4, there's a term here, comparable undergraduate degree. Ano po ibig sabihin dito? Medyo vague yung... ang worry ko lang dito is the SUCs may use, no? itong to expand the program for the purpose of getting some benefits out of this bill,
I see.
out of the law.
Mr. President, we can correct this, Mr. President, during the
Yes.
period of amendments, if needed.
Yeah, okay lang yung certificate degree, no? But yung comparable undergraduate degree, baka pamparami lang ito ng benepisyo.
Yes, Mr. President. We can correct this, Mr. President.
And there are also bills pending in both houses, no? Most likely in the lower house, proposing for the creation of additional SUCs. Do we have some data as to how many bills are now pending and how many SUCs are being proposed to be established or created? And isama ko na yung next question, will they also benefit? Masasama sila in case na the creation will be accomplished, say, this year?
Yes,
will they
Mr.
be
President.
included in the program? So that
Technically,
will
yes.
be additional burden on the subsidy.
Yes, Mr.
Or-
President. And probably, Mr. President, moving forward, the committee will now keep that in mind, no? The budget consideration in approving these possible new SUCs. But yes, Mr. President, if Congress approves an SUC, they should fall under this, Mr.
Should be
President.
included.
Yes, Mr. President.
And so what is the expected influx of enrollees, no? And I mean in the subsequent years, no? And based on the influx, what is the expected appropriation in the, say, 2-3 years from now?
Mr. President, the answer to that is it's up to us. Because it's up to the Senate
No,
and
but we
Congress
should
to
have
approve.
an estimate, no?
Yes, Mr. President.
Projection.
What we're currently using, Mr. President, is the number of enrollees currently. Because, Mr. President, at least, again, my understanding is that most of our SUCs are already at capacity. So I don't think anyone will admit that they are under capacity currently, no? So, Mr. President, we'll take a look at the number of enrollees they can accommodate and probably peg the initial capacity from there. But we'll ask CHED to do it, Mr. President. So it will be clear every year ilan talaga yung mga estudyanteng mabibigyan ng tuition fee subsidy.
Maybe we can consider some phasing, no? That there should be a certain number of years before SUCs may be allowed to admit more students, because we cannot just overburden the budget, the national budget, to subsidize the influx of men enrollees.
In fact, Mr. President, we
Maybe we
included,
can just program by way
Yes.
of projection.
and in fact, Mr. President, we included in the bill that CHED needs to approve the raise in capacity for the SUC. So they need to submit to CHED, they need to get permission to raise their capacity. So in short, Mr. President, there's a mechanism for us to be able to check that issue, Mr. President.
Thank you. I have no further question except that I'll be awaiting the data that I.
What were the data that you wanted?
Anyway,
President-
you can just submit it later,
Okay.
Mr.
Thank you
President.
very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Recto and Senator Gordon have made reservations to interpolate the bill, so I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1304 under Committee Report Number 28.
Not today.
Consideration of Senate Bill 1304 under Committee Report Number 28 is hereby suspended.
Wala pa si Joel, yun na muna ano. Mr. President, I move to resume consideration of Senate Resolution 283 under Committee Report Number 34.
Consideration of Senate Committee Report 283 is in order.
Mr. President, this is the resolution concurring in the ratification of the agreement between Japan and the Republic of the Philippines on social security. The parliamentary status of the measure is that we're in the period of interpellations. So may we recognize the sponsor, Senator Franklin Drilon, the President Pro Tem.
The Senate President Pro Temp is recognized.
Mr. President, there are no reservations for interpellation, so I move to close the period of interpellation.
There is no objection. Period of interpellation is hereby terminated.
Mr. President, I move to open the period of committee amendments, Mr. President.
There are no committee amendments, Mr. President.
If there are no objections,
I withdraw the motion if there are no committee amendments. I move to open the period of individual amendments, Mr. President.
period of individual amendment is in order.
The representation, the sponsor, has not received any indication from our colleagues that an individual amendment will be submitted?
There are no proposed individual amendments, Mr. President, so I move to close the period of individual amendments.
There are no objection. Period of individual amendments is hereby terminated.
In that case, Mr. President, I move that we approve on second reading proposed Senate Resolution 283, a resolution concurring in the ratification of the agreement between Japan and the Republic of the Philippines on social security.
Are there any objection? Hearing none, Senate Resolution number 283 of the Committee Report number 34 is hereby approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. I now move to suspend consideration of PS Resolution 283.
Committee Report number 34 is hereby suspended.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. And with the permission of the body, I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1280 under Committee Report number 22.
Committee Report number 22, Senate Bill number 1280 is in order.
Mr. President, this is the measure amending the Corporation Code of the Philippines. Parliamentary status of the measure is that we're still in the period of interpellation. So may I move to recognize the sponsor, Chairman of the Committee on Constitutional Amendments, Revision of Codes and Laws, Senator Franklin Drilon, the President Pro Tem.
The Senate President Pro Temp is recognized.
Senator Joel Villanueva has given his intentions to interpellate. He's on his way down, Mr. President. And Senator Villar and Senator Recto, the Minority Leader, have reserved their time to interpellate, but not today. So I move that we recognize Senator Joel Villanueva. But in the meantime, I move to suspend the session, Mr. President.
Session is suspended.
Okay.
Session your shoe.
Senator Villanueva, Mr. President, to interpellate.
Senator Villanueva is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Majority Floor Leader. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Would the distinguished sponsor would yield to some questions, Mr. President?
With pleasure, Mr. President.
At the onset, I would like to put on record, Mr. President, that this representation would like to associate himself in the initiative of the distinguished sponsor to amend provisions of the Corporation Code. Let me start by saying this afternoon, as I was listening attentively to the privileged speech of our colleague, Senator Mig Zubiri, he made mention about the importance of ease of doing business, and that is one of the objectives of this initiative. And let me again share the 2017 World Bank Ease of Doing Business report that gave the Philippines a ranking of 99 out of 190 countries in terms of ease of doing business. This is an improvement, Mr. President, from the 103rd place that was given to this country in 2016 report. And according to the World Bank report, among the reforms introduced were the extent of corporate transparency index, increasing the transparency of building regulations, and the introduction of an online system for filing and paying health contributions, and I quote. Mr. President, distinguished colleague, may I know if this initiative, this particular measure that we are deliberating upon, would, these amendments would be able to help in ease of doing business, and insofar as the criteria of this ranking in this survey?
Thank you for that question, Mr. President, as it would allow us to emphasize and place of record one of the main amendments or cluster of amendments that we have incorporated, and that is the cluster of amendments designed to enhance the ease of doing business. In general, Mr. President, first, we would the bill would streamline the process of incorporation. The process of incorporation starts with the name verification. Presently, a name cannot be accepted if it is confusingly similar. What is confusingly similar is in itself confusing. And therefore, we have changed the rule from confusingly similar standard to a distinguishability test. For example, to make a specific example, today, if there is a XYZ Dream Hospital, you cannot register or attempt to register an XYZ Dream Network because of the confusingly similar standard. Today, in our proposed measure, if it will pass, those two, the name XYZ Dream Network can be registered. The other thing, Mr. President, for purposes of ease of doing business, we have allowed a one-person corporation.
Yes.
For example, one-person corporation. Today, as we speak, one who wants to incorporate his business, even if he's alone, would have to look for 4 dummies, so that the dummies are given 1 share each, they become directors. Today, if Senator Joel Villanueva would want to put up business, he can incorporate by having a one-person corporation, and one-person corporation will enjoy the same benefits or privileges as a regular corporation, particularly the corporate shield against unlimited liability. So the third cluster of amendments would be the perpetual corporate term. Presently, you can only incorporate for a term of 50 years. If at the 50th year you forget to renew without your amendment, without this amendment, your corporation ceased to exist. And here, now we have proposed a perpetual corporate term. So these are some of the proposals that we have, precisely conscious of that shortcoming that we have in terms of the world index insofar as ease of doing business is concerned.
Thank you very much, distinguished colleague. Mr. President, I'm glad to hear these initiatives. And before I go to the one incorporator per corporation, I'd like to add to what the distinguished sponsor mentioned a while ago. with regard to the current system of SEC, with regard to that online system of name registration, because the system rejects proposed names for being similar to other existing corporate names. And minsan nga po, mas simple lang, no? Siguro yung mas komplikado, for example, if you have a band of brothers company versus band of brothers, B-U-N versus B-A-N-D. And these names are obviously different, but the system will reject it. And this has been a perennial complaint of a lot of our friends in the business sector. I'm just wondering, Mr. President, distinguished colleague, if the SEC can do this without going through or taking this path of legislation.
Once the bill becomes law, the system at the SEC must adjust to what is provided in the law, and the commissioner and of the SEC must simply tweak their machines or computers so that it will accept registration of corporate names under the new standard of distinguishability that we have imposed in this proposed measure once it becomes law. I agree that you know what, the example cited by by the good gentleman, indeed is one of the complaints. That's why we incorporated this proposed amendment, and we will not accept any excuse. Once the bill becomes law, it can no longer be a reason that the machine will not accept it.
Is that a guarantee of the distinguished sponsor of the bill?
Well, I'm speaking because this was already brought to our
Thank you.
attention, and Chairperson Herbosa assured us that this will be addressed.
Thank you very much, distinguished colleague. Mr. President, many of the proposed amendments of the Corporation Code seeks to ease some of the requirements in incorporating a corporation, as mentioned a while ago by the distinguished sponsor. For example, the number of incorporators may only be 1 instead of 5 incorporators in the current Corporation Code. And I was listening attentively during the discussions about this. But can I just ask one question with regard to this particular provision? Mr. President, distinguished colleague, with these proposals, will the public also expect that the processing of applications with the SEC will also be fast-tracked, considering that this is part of that provision?
Yes, Mr. President, because all of this that we're cracking our heads to incorporate in the new Corporation Code will simply come to naught if the bureaucracy in the SEC will not respond accordingly. These amendments were crafted with the direction and assistance of the entire Social Security SEC bureaucracy, and certainly we will put them to task if they are not able to deliver after we agreed to all of their proposals.
Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, during the course of the discussion of this provision, were there some sort of simulations as to what would be the impact of this provision?
In terms of
in terms of corporations that will be established, jobs that will be created, and all that kind of sort?
Well, these amendments are in response to the standards set by in the World Bank's ease of doing business, and therefore the objective is to set a business environment which will be competitive with that of other countries in terms of our being able to create an investment environment that is attractive to investment. Whether or not, so we want to remove this obstacle, or perceived or real, as a factor in decisions being made against investments in the country. But at the end of the day, it would still be the investor who will decide whether or not they would actually invest in the country. So, and these amendments, in fact, with the amendments, we are told that the incorporation of a business will only take 1 day, so that all of these are designed to
In this particular bill, Mr. President.
Yes, that is why we are providing all the legal infrastructure to make us more attractive, but at the end of the day, whether or not a particular business enterprise would come to us would depend on a lot of factors, and that we cannot predict, nor can we predict how many jobs this will create.
I'm still glad, Mr. President, distinguished colleague, to hear from the distinguished sponsor the 1 day deadline. And in relation to this, Mr. President, distinguished colleague, the Anti-Red Tape Act, which this representation authored not too long ago, provides that simple transactions shall be acted upon within 5 working days. While complex transactions, Mr. President, shall be acted upon with 10 working days from the date the application has been received. However, Mr. President, distinguished colleague, based from feedbacks, and I wanted to raise this issue, especially after hearing the 1 day initiative of this measure. Some of the applications in the SEC, Mr. President, as we have gathered in my office, take more than a month to process. And I'm really curious about it, and wondering what is happening. But I believe in the leadership of SEC. But does SEC have enough manpower or to ensure that the processing time for all applications with the SEC is shortened? Because in this particular measure, another question that I'd like to raise is that, are we going to increase the number of human resources for the Securities and Exchange Commission?
On the first question, Mr. President, the 1 day period refers only to the process of incorporation.
Incorporation, yes.
And of course, assuming that all the data required are in. Of course, if other activities like registration of securities, we cannot do it in 1 day because public interest would require a closer
That's
scrutiny.
understandable, yes.
But insofar as the incorporation of a business is concerned, the assertion and the promise is that the incorporation will be done in 1 day. Now, insofar as the personnel is concerned, this is not in the bill because the amendments, because this concerns substantial amendments to the corporation code. The matter of the personnel would have to be addressed by the Securities and Exchange Commission in coordination with the Department of Budget and Management.
Thank you, distinguished colleague, Mr. President. Let me go to the benefits that the MSMEs will get out of this particular measure. According to the Bureau of MSME Development, one of the difficulties the micro and small medium enterprises are facing is the tedious, lengthy, and complicated registration and licensing procedures for MSMEs. Will the proposed amendments be able to address this particular issue, Mr. President, distinguished colleague?
Mr. President, the amendment which will allow a one-person corporation, I think, is a single most significant contribution to the ease of doing business by MSMEs. Because here today, if you are a micro, a small, medium enterprise, would have to incorporate with 5 incorporators, and many instances they will simply not go through that and not avail of the benefits of a corporate entity. But today, if we are able to pass this law, then that benefit will certainly redound that provision on a one-person corporation will redound to the benefit of the MSMEs. And also, under the amendments, there is a directive to implement full electronic registration system. Again, this may not sound very significant, but for example, it will dispense with notarization.
Yes.
And again, this notarization is something that to a small businessman is a burden. But we dispense with this under this proposal, and therefore, again, this will contribute to the ease of doing business on MSME.
I'm glad to hear that the distinguished sponsor mentioned online filing and online monitoring system, and I commend the proposal to create an online filing and monitoring system, Mr. President. In fact, the introduction of an online system for filing and paying health contributions is one of the reasons for the Philippines' improved rating in the ease of doing business. And to date, Mr. President, distinguished colleague, SEC is already starting the process of establishing this online system even before the amendments are formally passed into law. May I know if that is correct, Mr. President, distinguished colleague?
For the record, yes, we confirm the statement of the gentleman from Bulacan.
Is this also, is this initiative included also, Mr. President, in the SEC's 2017 budget?
It is included in the 2016 budget, Mr. President.
Carried over for the 2017 budget?
Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Maybe for my last question, I would just like to ask, considering that the ARTA or the Anti-Red Tape Act also provides that agencies providing frontline services, like the Securities and Exchange Commission, shall be subjected to a report card survey. Am I correct that SEC is also part of this? And if the answer is in the affirmative, may I know, Mr. President, distinguished colleague, what was the rating given to the SEC by the Civil Service? If I'm not mistaken, it's the Civil Service Commission conducting this rate
Yes,
rate survey.
Mr. President, for the record, the SEC was subject to that scrutiny and in the form of a survey, and the rating is very satisfactory. That's what the bureaucracy informs us.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, distinguished colleague. I asked that question to ensure that SEC is in the right place and they will be able to implement this very important measure, especially in the coming days, that we wanted to ensure that we'll be able to address this problem, the ease of doing business, the problem of corruption, and the benefits needed for our MSMEs. Again, thank you so much for this opportunity to the author of this very important measure. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Thank you for the gentleman, to the gentleman from Bulacan for allowing us to spread into the record the main features of this measure. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Mr. President, in the meantime, I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1280 under Committee Report Number 22.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, consideration of Committee Report Number 22 on Senate Bill Number 1280 is hereby suspended.
Mr. President, earlier, Senator Laila de Lima called my attention to a correction that she wanted to do as regards to the journal of yesterday. So, with the consent of the chamber, I move to reconsider the approval of the journal of Monday, February 6, 2017.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, the motion is hereby carried.
May I call the attention of the Secretariat and the Senate President on page 915, on the third paragraph in the right column. It reads, believing that the measure would meet many objections from the Catholic Church, particularly as, etc., etc. The correction that Senator Laila de Lima wants is that she did not mean it this way. She meant believing that the measure would not meet objections from the Catholic Church. That is what she meant in what she said. So I move that we correct that particular line, Mr. President.
Are there any objection? Hearing none, motion is hereby carried.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to approve the journal of Monday, February 6, 2017 as corrected.
Are there any objection? Hearing none, the journal is hereby approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to adjourn the session until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Wednesday, February 8, 2017.
Is there any objection? There being none, the session is adjourned until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Wednesday, February 8, 2017.